And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Yo, Lord willing, Jeff Canarsie, Mob Talk Radio. Check it out. Yo, we stay quiet like Russell Buffalino when things will get ugly like Pepsi's death in Casino. Who do we know? No one, nobody. But we're all well respected like Della Croce and Gotti. I know wild nights have been a nocturne.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie, and we've got a pretty big one this week. We are going to talk about some news and notes, obviously, to start. And then we're going to get into a large Q&A followed by the Cal-Neva Lodge and the hit of Dino Bravo, the former WWF, WWE wrestler. And the reason why we are going to cover a couple of different things this week is the Cal-Neva Lodge really in historical reference as to the mob and Sam Giancana and Sinatra was really a way station for the Kennedys to meet with Giancana. And I think that nobody has really ever talked about the Cal-Neva Lodge and some of the things that went on there, which includes, obviously, Marilyn Monroe, the McGuire sisters, those whores, and some other things. But the Cal-Neva Lodge was an integral part of a meeting ground for the mob for a long time, and nobody's really ever explored that and talked about some of the things that went on there, so we are going to talk about that. The reason why I am bringing up the Dino Bravo hit, whose real name was Adolfo Bresciano, is because, first of all, I got to clarify, I'm not a fan of wrestling whatsoever, but I've known for a long time the ins and outs of why Dino Bravo was murdered. And I know that there is a documentary that Vice News produces called Dark Side of the Ring. And they have been talking about like the Jimmy Snuka murdering his ex-wife and some other stuff like that. And they cover sort of the seedier parts of professional wrestling. But this is mob genre stuff. And I believe it's either this week or next week coming. They're going to talk about Dino Bravo. And I'm going to tell you right now, they're not going to have the information that I have. They're what they're likely going to have is what the version and gossip of what other wrestlers have said. But throughout the years, I've picked up bits and pieces, and I believe that I can come pretty close to what happened to Dino Bravo. And I think that when you are a wrestling documentary and you try to parlay yourselves into the mob genre and you don't know a fucking thing about the mob, I think at best you're probably going to get 9 or 10 different scenarios. And in reality, those scenarios are not really going to come close as to what happened. And so if you're into wrestling or you're into Dino Bravo or whatever the case may be, you're going to want to stay tuned to that part of the show because I'm going to break it down and give you the facts like nobody ever has as far as that goes. I'm not going to name names, obviously, as far as who killed it. Who killed him, but I think I can give you enough background where, you know, is it 100%? No, but it's going to be the closest thing that you've ever heard. And like I said, we're going to cover the Cal-Neva Lodge and some other things along the way. One thing that we are trying to do is mix it up a little bit. I know that I said that we were going to get back to the biography aspect of what I do this week, but we're not. We sort of are, but we're going to do a couple of different things, and I think when we start branching out and doing a little different things here and there, left and right, I think it's a little more entertaining. It is for me because what a lot of people don't realize is this is my life 24/7, 360 fucking 4 days a year. It never ends. On my downtime, when I try to go out to dinner with somebody, they bring shit up, and it's like stuff I don't want to talk about. So I try to keep a firm split on my personal life and this stuff, but because of people I know and stuff like that, this is my life 24/7, and it's not the easiest thing to do all the time, I got to admit. So I try to mix it up and do some different stuff along the way. So that's what we have got going on for today. Right off the bat, we're going to talk about Vinny Asaro. If you're familiar with Vinny Asaro, you know, a few months ago, we were, first of all, and this is by no means an egotistical fucking thing I'm trying to say to you, but I'm the only one who talked about Vinny Asaro and his condition in prison. Nobody else did. and I don't know why they didn't, because if the information was easily given to me, I don't understand why nobody else didn't have access to this. But months ago, we put it out on the blog that Vinny Asaro had suffered a stroke in prison, was really having a tough time, and they were basically leaving him sitting in a wheelchair in dirty clothes, not taking care of him, not letting him get a shower. And that's some egregious shit, because no matter what you have done, and Vinny Asaro isn't in prison on fucking murder charges and nothing. It's a chumped up bullshit fucking arson charge. He's fucking 85 fucking years old. That's not how you treat people, even in the prison system. And so we, like I said, a few months ago, we'd reported that he had had a stroke, wasn't being cared for in the right kind of way. And reports just never really seemed to kind of come out. We were the only people that did it, and I was hoping that people, you can go back to previous shows where we talked about it, or you go over to the blog and see it. But it's become apparent that Vinny Asaro could barely speak. He wasn't recognizing his own families, was struggling to even get a word out of his mouth. He's just a very sick man. And his attorneys basically filed the compassionate release paperwork, and the release was granted, back 3 or 4 days ago. And like I said, he was convicted of arson previously, and he was given a really fucking harsh sentence for somebody that was 84 years old at the time. Look, most arson convictions usually aren't federal statutes anyway. Usually that's a state beef, but because of who Vinny Asaro is alleged to have been, what normally would have been a 2 to 5 year sentence, he got nailed with an 8-year sentence, which is fucking ridiculous. It's almost twice the fucking amount of time anybody else would have fucking gotten. But I've also speculated from day one that a lot of the time that he got in this particular case really was a result because he walked from the Lufthansa heist. Now, if you don't know anything about that, Vinny Asaro was allegedly a part of the Lufthansa heist team, the infamous Henry Hill stuff. And apparently the fact that he walked from those charges really infuriated the prosecutors and the judge in that case. And so they asked for the max, and they got it. And this is just sort of a symptom of how the system fucking operates. If they can't get you on this, they're going to get you down the line for something stupid and give you twice the fucking time that you should get. Patsy Perello is probably another example of a guy who got hammered on bullshit charges and got like double the time he should have fucking gotten. So to me, it's like a simple double jeopardy type of sentencing, in my opinion. Listen, I root for the bad guys. I always have. I'm not saying Vinny's a bad guy, but the thing is the federal government has always done this, and they always fucking will. And so in either case, like I said, the feds weren't happy with the fact that they were not happy with the fact that Asaro walked from them charges, and so they basically fucking bulldozed him in the arson charges. And so he's been released, thank God, but once again, the fucking federal government's out for fucking blood. They're fucking vampires. And rather than just say, the guy's fucking 85, what the fuck's he going to do? What's he going to do? Kill somebody? So the judge's statement was very clear, is that, look, he's 85 years old. He's sick. We don't think he's a danger to the community. We don't think that he's going to be having high-level meetings with gangsters. His health's in a fucking horrible shape. And yet the federal government's not happy about it. And the last I heard, the federal government was looking into what they could do to legally challenge the judge's decision. I mean, the guy's fucking 85. You're really going to hold a fucking guy in prison and give him virtually a fucking death sentence over an arson? I mean, what the fuck is arson at the end of the day? The guy allegedly had somebody who cut him off in traffic, whatever the case may be. He had people go, allegedly, according to the federal government, and set their shit ablaze. Nobody got hurt. Insurance pays for it. What the fuck you crying over? But the feds want to make it a capital case, and they're not going to let it go. And to me, that's just like a fucking scumbag fucking thing to do. It really is. But, lucky for Vinny, he's able to get out and be with his family, and hopefully, God willing, he can recuperate and not get this fucking zombie plague that's going around. Also in great news, our friend Joey Merlino is no longer at a halfway house. He's home with his family, which is a great fucking thing. And really, this is more of a symptom. Some of these guys that are getting out, usually they're getting released for a couple different reasons. The first one is they have a superseding they have a superseding like health issue. So they have something that health-wise that puts them at risk for the coronavirus, puts them at risk for this, that, and the third. And it's guys that are normally have very, very short sentences. And Joey's been out. And I believe, according to what I've been told, he's off paperwork in July anyway. And so what the fuck? You're going to keep him in a halfway house. From what I was understood, Joey was doing construction work down there in Miami. But because of fucking COVID-19, they weren't letting anybody go out and fucking work anymore. So what the fuck is the point of having Joey sit in a fucking halfway house doing nothing? Especially when, Joey does have a certain situation, and I don't want to call it a medical condition, but, months ago he had an issue with his ticker. He's fine, but that also puts him at risk for stupid shit. And so I guess paperwork was filed in Joey's case, and Joey's at home, and he's going to do the rest of his time, which is, I believe, till the end of July, under house arrest in his own house, where he will not be susceptible for this fucking zombie plague. So that brings up a bigger issue, and we're happy Joey's out, we're happy Vinny's out, but it brings up another issue, and it brings up Pete Gotti, who has also tried repeatedly to get out on a compassionate release, and now I would assume that Frankie Locascio is going to try the same thing. But I just don't think that either one of those guys, not Pete Gotti and not Frankie Loke, are going to get that kind of a deal. And I say that because, individually on its own, they're both old guys. They have a solid argument on their age, the deterioration of their health or whatever. But I just don't see the feds doing those two guys any favors. Like I said, it's guys with relatively short time that are getting pushed out early, and I don't think, especially when you consider who Frankie Loke is and who Pete Gotti is, who they were associated with, what they were convicted of, albeit justifiably or not, I don't think they're going to get any such fucking consideration whatsoever. There is a solid argument, like I said, about the health status of both of them with advancing age, but, and maybe you would have more of a solid argument if, like, they respectively had 3 or 4 years left on their sentences. That's a different argument. But if you look at Pete Gotti, he's 80 years old. He's not supposed to be out till 9, 10, 20, 31. There's just no way they're going to do it. Frankie Loke is 87 years old and has a life sentence. So I don't see the feds doing them any favors. But if I had to make an argument for one of them, I would probably make an argument for Frankie Loke, and he's 87 fucking years old. First of all, he's 87. He could get out tomorrow and fucking pass away with his age anyway. But I don't think they're ever going to let Frankie Loke go because of his association with John Gotti. I think by a lot of accounts, people have talked about Pete Gotti saying he really shouldn't have been a boss, this, that, and the third. And I don't want to get into to any of that. But Frankie sort of has an ally in that piece of shit Sammy Gravano, who is just now coming forward saying that Frankie Loke really had nothing to do with the Bono hit and all these other murders. But it's also a tad strange to me that for the last 20 fucking years, Gravano never bothered to say a fucking word about Frankie Loke. And Gravano's excuse now is, well, nobody fucking asked me, so I didn't volunteer nothing. Well, why not? If you know a guy didn't do something, then you come forward, you do what you got to do. But Gravano, Gravano's a rat, he's a liar, and Gravano has really only aptly told the truth, or his version of the truth, only when it helped himself. So it's going to come down to a lot of different things. Now, is Pete Gotti really as sick as, say, Vinny Asaro? Well, if you listen to the attorneys say he is. And if that's the case, should he be considered? 2030 is like fucking 10 years away. I just don't see it happening. And I'm not saying or justifying that one getting out over the other is fair. But I think what we're going to see here is just guys with relatively 1 year, 2 years, 3 years getting out. And that's just the way the cookie crumbles. And it's got to be something that I think that probably absolutely fucking makes the fucking feds irate. Just because they've fought long and hard to put these guys away, and now these guys are all getting out. And just recently, as of today, and I got to be careful how I say this, but word is that Matty Madonna is very, 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 very sick. Some people are reporting that Matty Madonna has actually passed away. I cannot verify that, and I don't want to come out and say that that's accurate, because if I'm wrong, I don't want to hurt nobody. So there are some different reports coming out that Matty Madonna has passed away, but all I really do know at this point is that Matty Madonna was very, very, very sick with COVID-19. Matty Madonna's not a young guy, and if that's truly the case, then that's really fucking unfortunate. Really, really, really is unfortunate. So that's pretty much all we got for news and notes for today. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to begin answering your questions about organized crime. And once again, I counted 150 questions just in the last day and a half or so. If I don't get to them, you know why. I have repeatedly said that I'm not going to answer Gotti questions, but they keep coming up anyway. So a part of the deal is going to be is if it's relevant to a broader topic, then I'll sort of discuss it. But if it's asking about John Gotti Jr., I'm just not going there. I'm done with that. But if it's a relevant topic, like as in comparison to, then I definitely will. And if you're a fan of Russell Buffalino, I got some stuff you're not going to believe today. So stay tuned to Mob Talk Radio.
Today's Mob Talk Radio episode is brought to you by the following sponsors. Scarf Inc. Pest Control Services. If you've got a pest, we'll whack 'em out. Are you a snitch? Are you a rat bastard? Do you want to go on the lam with a disguise so clean that people will think you're Frank Vincent or Daniel Boone? Leonetti Riccone wigs for the distinguished snitch in you.
And now, a friendly message from our friend, Ron Previty.
Hold on there a minute, pal. Bring me Solo and the Wookie. He owes me 10 dimes. I know at times we like to have a lot of fun on this show, but it's time to get serious about one thing. I know that the coronavirus pandemic has hurt a lot of my listeners and their businesses. Restaurants have been ordered to close, gyms have been ordered to close, cigar lounges have been ordered to close, and even bars have been ordered to close. These are small businesses that don't always have the cash reserves to continue making their rent or mortgage payments. They can't even pay their vendors. My good friend Mike Kaysen of Kaysen & Kaysen is an experienced bankruptcy lawyer that is there to help you right now. Kaysen & Kaysen represents individuals and small businesses in complex bankruptcy proceedings in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Miami. Give Mike a call at 646-397-6226, and if you mention Mob Talk Radio, he's going to give you a free consultation. Once again, it's Mike Kaysen of Kaysen & Kaysen, 646-397-6226. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are going to get into the Q&A, and per usual, I say it all the time. If I don't get to your question, it's a couple of different things. Either it's going back in the hat, or I'm just not going to answer it because I already have. With over 100 and some shows already at this point, chances are I probably answered your question already. So you're going to have to check that. Okay, so we got a lot of questions today, and we're going to try to get through these like we usually do as quick as we can because we've got a lot of other things to cover. Question number one. I think a lot of people get your understanding of Philadelphia wrong. While people can use the term Homer when it comes to you, I just think you have a better grip on the politics of Philadelphia and the personalities better than a lot of people who have been doing this for 30 years. That being said, I've checked out a lot of your info, and it's usually insanely accurate. But I also like the fact that you don't toss their garbage on Front Street. To some, that may make them think you don't know anything, but obviously you do. But you obviously also know where to draw the line in the sand, which is much different from those two jerk-offs in Philly. Can you explain Philly once more for those who don't get it, please? Yeah, I mean, it's very, very basic. I'm not I think people get it a little bent, a little bit twisted, because I'm not comparing and contrasting New York to Philadelphia as far as territory, turf, or stuff like that. The politics can be the same, but I've said this all the time, and I never get tired of saying it because it's the truth. Is that let's use a good example here. Let's take the Genovese crime family. Now, let's use numbers from the 80s. Let's say there's 250 people in that crime family. That's not accounting for fucking associates. Okay, well, maybe it is. We'll say maybe they have 85, 90 guys that are made, and then underneath that, you got a bunch of associates. So when you have a crime family that is that fucking big, there are going to be guys that do know each other, but they don't know each other. And what I mean by that is they aren't tight with them guys. So when you take a smaller group, at least numbers-wise, and you take a group of people that have grown up together since they was in fucking diapers, these are guys that know each other. They know what their favorite color is. They know what not to bust their balls on. They know what not to say to them to get them going. And when you have a group like that, even in any business, doesn't even have to be organized crime, but any business that you have where people have grown up together, you can't crack that. You might put one away, you might put two away, but you've got 40 others who have been with each other since day one, carrying the fucking letter people in fucking elementary school together, playing at recess together, fighting together. When you grow up, you can't crack that. And I think that's been one of the resounding features of Philadelphia, and it has been for a long time, traditionally and true. When you have a larger conglomerate of fucking people, the odds of having more rats, more snitches, more informants, etc., is going to be greater, right? But at the same time, I marvel at the fact that you could take 30, 40, 50 guys who all know each other since kids, and you could put them in a situation, I like to call it, or into a business, if you want to call it that. Excuse me. And you can't crumble that. It's like Kevlar. You might take one, but you're not going to take 20. In New York, what typically happens is they're not just arresting one, they're arresting 30. They're arresting 20. And so I think there is some benefit to having a smaller operation. I'll be honest with you, sure. Are you going to make as much money? No, of course not. Are you going to have to be more inventive, think on your feet? Absolutely, that's what you're going to have to do. But if you look at the history of organized crime in Philadelphia, specifically after Nick Scarfo, excuse me, fucking zombie virus, right? If you look at this a particular group, and I'm not going to get into the exacts here, but when you take a group who have known each other forever, post Nicky Scarfo, around the John Stanfa after the fact, these guys are like a fucking military crew. They're like an operative crew from the military. You can't crack them. You can't bust them down. You're not going to get a rat that's worth a fuck because nobody in their right mind is going to talk to nobody. South Philadelphia is a place, and listen, not only do I have family there, that's number one, okay, and I got friends there, but I've spent a lot of time there, and it's always been the same, regardless of where I have hung out, where I have been, and we're talking going back 25 years. It's a very tight-lipped place. It's a very quiet place. You're always going to have the jerk-offs. You're always going to have the gossip starters who sit at the end of the bar and gossip about this one and that one. That's everywhere. But at the end of the day, if you're looking, it's hard for me to encapsulate this correctly in words, but I always like to use the term Motown, and the reason why I do is because if you go back in time, some of the best music that ever has been come out in this world is Motown, Four Tops, Temptations, stuff like that. These guys are old school like that. You can tell if you've ever been in a place and somebody walks in, nobody looks at them, nobody makes eye contact. Hey, how you doing? They might smile, wave, and that's the end of it. But nobody in that place is going to fucking utter a word about another person. That's another thing. In New York, you typically have guys that will talk shit about everybody else around them. Belly aching about this one, that one, and the third. And the one thing that I can tell you is, being around anybody, I have never heard anybody badmouth anybody else. It's just not how things are done. I think that there's a philosophy of, if you got something to say, you go fucking say it to the person and you leave it at that. It's not for public consumption. Pictures are not for everybody. And that's the difference. I always sort of imagine South Philadelphia as walking down and you got the old lady peeking her head out the window. She doesn't recognize you. Somebody's getting a call. Somebody weird's in the neighborhood. That's sort of the vibe I've always gotten. And I like to deal with people that are direct, that just say what they mean what they say, and you move forward. Like, don't sit there and act like a jerk off for 25 minutes and then get to the problem. Just get to the fucking problem. And that's the way that my experience with them has always been. And so it's not that I'm really being a homer. It's just that I can only speak from my experience. And if I'm lying, then, then that's up to you, to decide. But it's I would rather be, and people ask me all the time, to play these mob fantasy games through a Q&A of, if you could be with this one, you could be with that one, who would you be? I wouldn't be in New York at all. Philadelphia is where I would be. I can't really explain it any better than just being like, it's a throwback. If you want to see what the mob was like in the 60s, in the 50s, that's the place. Granted, accidents happen, guys get caught up in shit. That's the reality of life. But these guys are old school. They're tough. And it's not a matter of me picking one over the other. It's just, I think sometimes personalities mesh better in other places than others. So, all right. What are mob guys doing during this coronavirus? Okay, I can quote a mob guy. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but this one, when I asked this guy, what you up to, he said, nothing, just busting balls. We're all busting each other's balls. They got nothing to do. They're trying to stay healthy, hanging out with their families at the house. So there you go. That's what they're up to. They're just busting balls. All right. Seeing as how you hadn't consciously decided or seen how impactful your decision to pursue this historical overview of the life would be, that's a good way of putting it, and how successful your diligence, integrity, and tenacity towards the truth would be in elevating you into a class all of your unique own, are you surprised and gratified at how it's all turned out despite some very painful repercussions that you suffered personally? And on this end, the admiration for your fearlessness and kick-ass, no-holds-barred honesty is something that's not to be vilified, but actually treasured. To be honest with you, look, there's days where, I'm surprised by the good stuff that I get, and some days I'm surprised when I get the bad stuff. There's some days when I've had enough of this shit. This is not, I try to explain to people all the time, and I do I tread very lightly when I do. If you think that you can do this, I want you to go out and do it. I want you to, and this is what I try to explain to all the fucking people that don't like me, and people are entitled not to like me all day fucking long. But the point is like, until you're around this shit 24/7, there's a political game to this. You really got to be careful. This is not as simple as grabbing a microphone, saying whatever the fuck you want, and not having repercussions. There have been repercussions for me. I think I've been very, very honest about that. I have never really ever had, with the exception of a couple of different times, ever had crossword. First of all, I've never had crosswords with nobody. That's the truth. But if there have been times where guys have not liked what I said, absolutely. Absolutely. Are they entitled to feel that way? Absolutely. Am I willing to give an olive branch and say, okay, let's talk about it. Why don't you give me your side of it, and then we'll figure out some sort of middle ground. And I found that when I do that, most of them after about 10 minutes are cool with me, and they're like, it is what it is. But the guys that do like me, know that I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to say what I want to say, but I do it in a way that doesn't hurt nobody. If I was out there hurting people, believe me, I don't think this would have lasted as long as it would have. I think I would have had a lot of problems. In my book, you're gonna find out about a situation where myself and my former attorney were being targeted for murder by some guys, some Albanian guys. That's going to be in the book, and that was a situation that was. It went from a stupid fucking issue to something very serious, very fucking quickly. And people may fucking doubt that, but the people that were involved know what happened. And, it was a situation where we were being targeted to be killed. It's as simple as that. And I should tell that whole story, but I don't want to give the illusion that I'm somebody in the streets, because that's not what I'm saying. But we were targeted for a very fucked up reason, on the words of somebody that really doesn't have any basis to speak. And if people want to doubt that, one of the things that did happen as a result of that is we were actually somehow lucky enough to get the fuck away from this car. It was chasing us through the streets of Brooklyn. And we got the plate. And the plate came back, and we were able to kind of do our little fucking research and figure out where these guys came from, the Bronx. And we knew where it was coming from at that point. So this, and that's not a ramification of my show. That's a ramification of some other things. But no, I mean, I think I've been honest, and a lot of people will, the haters will come out and tell you whatever they think they've heard, whatever they think they know. And the truth is that, come ask me. I'll tell you the truth. I'm not going to hide from nothing. I haven't had a whole lot of interaction with my family for years. There's, obviously personal stuff I won't go into. But there's also, because of the fact that I do this, it's something they don't like. It's something that they haven't liked from day one. In fact, I can be blunt enough to say this, is that my brother, whose name I'm not going to mention, we'll call him Anthony, was really upset with me. Didn't like what I was doing, felt like I was a danger to his family because of my interactions with people. And, that's a coward thing to do, because first of all, because I say hello to somebody doesn't mean nothing. But it was his stance that I was getting involved with people that were a danger to him, his kids. And listen, he's entitled to have his fucking opinion all day. I think he's a coward. I've always thought he was a coward. He's not going to like the fact that I said that, but I'm being honest, because at some point you have to straight a line of family is blood and related, and who I hang out with, who I talk to, should not impact the fact that somebody's my brother. But that's one of the issues why I have a problem with George Anastasia, and I've talked about that before. Because a lot of people, and I'm not trying to get on a rabbit trail here, and I'll try to wrap it up, but what people don't understand, I just didn't wake up one fucking day and decide, fuck George Anastasia. I was actually quite a fan of George Anastasia for years. I read a lot of his books. But then he did something where allowed himself to be a part of something, and I can't go into the total details because then I'll end up giving up where my brother works and all this kind of shit, and I don't want to do that. But because my brother does live in that area, as do nieces and nephews of mine, and I don't want to get into that. But the thing is that when someone goes to an author and they say to this author, I want a meeting with this guy's brother, you know how to get access to him, we're going to threaten him, we're going to scare him. And the author, and Anastasia finds out about this through a fucking letter from an attorney of, might be in your best interest to come out publicly and say, listen, I had nothing to do with this. This guy's a fucking jerk off. And the fact that he didn't infuriated me. It infuriated me because at some point, I don't give a fuck who you are. If I've done nothing to you and this guy is going to try to throw you into some half-assed fucking fear tactic bullshit and you can't come out and speak against it, then what the fuck is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? That's what my problem with Anastasia is. If he had just addressed it and he had just said, you know what, it's bullshit, I'm sorry this happened, I would never. He didn't do that because his ego allows him to be too fucking self-important to do the right fucking thing. All he had to do is reach out to me and say, listen, I don't know what's going on, but whatever you're hearing isn't true. I'll say something to the guy, or I'll say something, this is bullshit, this is nonsense, but he didn't do it. That's why I don't fucking like the guy. And that's one of the repercussions of that. So when I tell you I don't like Anastasia, that's why I don't like him. I don't give a fuck who does like the guy. I don't give a fuck who talks to the guy. I don't give a fuck who has dinner with the guy. I don't give a fuck who jerks the guy off on a cracker. I really don't fucking care. At the end of the day, where I come from, how I try to conduct myself is, if you've got a problem, you go to this source. I did that. like a coward. The motherfucker didn't want to say a word back. He just wanted to fucking ha ha ha. This is so funny. Well, it's not funny to me. How the fuck do you think he would react if I banged on his door and said, listen, George, him and Ratweiser would call 911 the minute they saw my face coming up the driveway. You know what I mean? So I just think as a man, there's a way there's a way you handle things. And because of the bullshit between Anastasia and another group of people, that's why we sent it through an attorney, because that way it's professional. Nobody can say I was threatening nobody, and he don't respond to shit. He ignores it, thinks the shit's funny. So I don't. So if you're one of the ones that likes Anastasia, I got no beef with that. If you like to read his stuff, I've got no beef with that. You call the guy a friend, I call you a jerk off. That's the reality of it, because the guy's a fucking scumbag. And that's not to say that if he doesn't someday apologize to me for that, and granted, it's not his fault this asshole went and did this bullshit, but at some point, you owe it upon yourself, especially when you have a reputation as a renowned author, to fucking to speak up and fucking say, nah, that's not cool, that's not true, blah, 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 blah. But he couldn't do it. So fuck him. Fuck him. That's just the way I see it. That's why I don't like the guy. And so if anybody thinks it's because, he has a differing opinion on me, that's not what it is. He knows what he did. He's never addressed it. He never will. And Ratweiser I just don't like because he looks like a fucking soaked tampon against a wall, that fucking prick. Anyway, all right, moving on. I sorry about the fucking rabbit trail there. All right. I really shouldn't answer this, but I'm going to. Gunnar Lindblom, is he an informant? Is his story true? Look, I honestly don't know. Nobody's ever shown me an ounce of evidence that he was an informant. To my knowledge, he did do a ton of time in prison. So, it is what it is as far as his story. Look, I will say this about anybody and everybody. So I don't want anybody to think I'm picking him out of the hat, because that's not the case. Nobody is completely honest about what they've done. Some people try to mitigate it. Some people try to downplay it. Some people try to make themselves out to be something more than they ever were. And I'm not saying that's the case when it comes to him, because I don't know the guy. But everybody inflates. And anybody that tells you they don't inflate a story when they're writing a book to make it sound better is full of shit. Everybody does that. Based on facts and logic in his particular case, I think his crimes and what he's done are pretty well noted. So you cannot deny that. You can't deny he did time. But from where I stand, to my knowledge, he never testified, never gave up information on anybody in his life. That I can tell you. The guy went to the can. He found a way to make money legitimately writing books. There's nothing wrong with that. He didn't name names. He didn't tell on anybody. He just went and did his time. And so from that perspective, I've got no reason to knock the guy. Personally, I think he's a fucking douchebag. And I know that the feeling is definitely mutual. We don't like each other, and that's just the way it is. In life, you got to have humility. And when you come off sort of arrogant and like you want to play the tough guy bullshit with me, you're not going to get anywhere with me. You're not going to get anywhere with me when you try to play tough guy and stupid shit, especially if you're not willing to admit shit you've done. So it's like, don't point the finger and then say you, and then forget everything you did. So at the end of the day, I just kind of leave that over to the side. Guys trying to, make money. There's nothing wrong with that. But no, the guy's not a rat. He's definitely not a rat. If he was, I would tell you, but to my knowledge, he's not. Unless somebody puts 302s on my fucking desk or shows me information that that's what he did, I'll never believe it. I just don't think he's that type of guy. He could be an asshole, a douche. He could have a personality that doesn't mesh with mine, but that doesn't mean I'm going to go out of my way to call the guy a rat. I'm just not going to do it. So, all right, other than forming the commission, what do you think was the single best decision made by a boss of a family? Also, Luciano gets all the credit for forming the commission, but was it his idea, and was he solely responsible for the National Crime Syndicate? Luciano does get all the credit. He always probably will, because he's the guy that kind of glued the books together. But the idea originally was not his. That idea had been through Masseria, Maranzano, through other people. Frankie Yale had ideas like that. But Luciano gets sort of the props for that, because he's the guy that put the glue between the books and pressed them together. And that's really why Luciano, because he was able to take the idea and go with it and install it and make it happen. And there's been a lot of decisions made in organized crime, and it's really hard to pick one that outweighs anything other in terms of that. I think, forming the commission and allowing other ethnic groups into the mob, at least from the perspective of working, was probably one of the smartest things I've ever seen. Moving into Las Vegas was probably one of the smartest things I've ever seen. And that's where I think that's where we've gone with that. All right, 2 questions. I've heard the Bonanos got their seat back on the commission. Is that true? As far as I understand, yes. Listen, I'm not in the mafia. I'm not on the commission. From what I understand, they have, but I don't know the validity of that. John Gotti and Joe Massino were friends, according to various books and interviews. Gotti proposed the Bonanos to get their seat on the commission back, but it was turned down by Vincent the Chin. Do you feel it was Gotti and Massino's relationship that made the Chin not want the Bonanos back in? Are you aware of any other reasons why the Chin could have said no? To my knowledge, Joey Massino wanted to take the Bonanno crime family and rename it the Massino crime family. Thank fucking God that didn't happen. And he would use John Gotti to facilitate that move and the commission seat, but the Chin absolutely wasn't going to have it, along with other decisions that were made. And the same can be same for the commission seat as well. It just wasn't going to happen at the time. And what that proves right there, and without causing hysteria, okay, listen to me very carefully. What that proves when Gotti has to go to Vinny the Chin is that Gotti was not in control of the mob like everybody said. It was Vincent the Chin. Vinny the Chin was in control of everything. Vinny the Chin didn't have much respect for John Gotti. I think that's been publicly, noted. And I think anybody who aligned themselves close to Gotti at that point wasn't going to get a swing vote and wasn't going to get a favor out of Vinny the Chin. I think that much is true. Vincent the Chin was an old school guy. He believed in the code. He believed in values. He believed in rules. And people who violated those rules or thumbed their noses at a code, he just wasn't going to tolerate on any level. He wasn't going to do nobody any favors. And thank God that Vinny the Chin was able to see something in Joey Massino he didn't like, because at the end of the day, look what Massino did. Look what he did, All right. Was Tommy Patera feared amongst other families? I heard in a podcast he would scare other scary guys. Listen, Tommy Patera was no joke. I'm not going to tell you I know Tommy Patera. I've talked to him a couple times, obviously. That's pretty much public knowledge. Tommy was a no-nonsense guy. He could make money and he could kill at will. Greg Scarpa sort of had that same effect on everybody. That's why anybody running around saying they robbed Tommy Patera or they got over on Tommy Patera is bullshit. In fact, when I talked to Tommy, I told him that there was an informant that was running around telling everybody he robbed Tommy Patera. Patera didn't do nothing to him. And what Tommy tells me is, he goes, yeah, send me more stories about this informant. I need more laughs in prison. And that's the reality. It's easy to talk about a guy when he's behind the wall versus talking to him when he's out on the fucking streets. Tommy Patera was not somebody you wanted to fuck with on any fucking level whatsoever. All right. Since Russell Buffalino stepped in as boss of the Genovese family for a short time, did he have any involvement with Vinny the Chin Gigante? Also, if Gigante was partly behind Angelo Bruno being murdered, wouldn't Buffalino have stepped in and done something about it since he was friends with Bruno? I don't think Vincent Gigante was really involved in the Bruno hit. I think what he does to Antonio Caponegro after the fact really speaks volumes as to Vinny the Chin not tolerating that kind of shit. I think that Buffalino, while he was powerful, I don't think he was as powerful as Vinny the Gigante at the time. I really don't. If you go back a decade before, maybe a little different. And Buffalino was a very powerful guy. He just did not have the power that Vinny Gigante did at the time. That's just my opinion. People may disagree with me. And Buffalino wasn't the type of guy who's going to be a cutthroat, whack him right now kind of guy. He's very low-key. Everything he did was methodical. And after Bruno's killed, what could Russell Buffalino have done? What could he have done at that point that that was going to solve it. I mean, that decision had to be left up to the commission. It had to be left to, at the time, the head of the commission, who would have been Vinny Gigante. He would have had to figure out what the best option to do was. But what's Buffalino going to do? Say, nope, I'm whacking everybody? I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, Caponegro and Casella pay for it, right? So there you go. All right. What can you tell us about Chicken Man Testa? I can never find anything on him. I know he had a very short reign as boss. However, if the Chin Hand picked him and Scarfo was willing to work under him, he had to be a real OG, right? At the time, Philadelphia was a powder keg, and I don't think we can compare Testa to Bruno, or even Scarfo to Bruno, to that matter. The very different personalities, very different people. Obviously, Testa was, right underneath Angelo Bruno. Look, Scarfo was offered the job. Vinny the Chin just said, do you want it? And Scarfo said no. He turns it down. And I think that's more indicative of the tensions that were boiling behind the scenes at the time. And perhaps, listen, I can't speak for Nicky. He's dead. But I think Nicky kind of realized there was a lot of discontent going on. There was a lot of chatter, a lot of tension, a lot of bad blood. And I think that Scarfo realized that if anything happened to especially the fact that Bruno was killed, and then Caponegro gets killed, I think that Scarfo sort of saw this as something that wasn't going to end anytime soon, and I don't think he wanted any part of it. And this is why, at the end of the day, I think he truly, tells Vinny the Chin, no, let Phil Testa take it over. I don't think it was because he was being gracious. I don't think it was because Nick Scarfo was like, no, you were the underboss, you were the consigliere, you go ahead, you take it. Rightfully it's yours. I don't think that was any part of Nicky's decision making at the point. But depending on who you talk to, I've heard people say that Phil Testa was bullish, inept, not very intelligent. But then again, I have other people that have told me that the complete opposite of that. I just think that Phil Testa walked into a power vacuum. I don't think it could have been anybody, but I don't think anybody who stepped in right then and there was going to survive. Killing Bruno was too easy. That's a bigger issue than whacking Testa. I mean, if you're going to talk about killing two guys, there's more severity killing Bruno than there would be Testa. And Testa was, like I said earlier, the underboss to Bruno. So we have to sort of at least give him credit there. Bruno felt that he was a good guy, could trust him, and nobody was going to get that position out of being lucky or a good guy. You have to have some credit. And so I think, we could say that Testa obviously had the respect and friendship of Bruno. But then again, to be in the position that he was, obviously he had some sort of leadership skills, but sometimes being the underboss to a guy who is that respected keeps you alive. And that's one of the things that when I listen to a lot of these mob shows and podcasts or whatever the case may be, they don't talk about the politics of it. Sometimes you could be a shit underboss, and I'm not saying that's the case in Phil Testa. You could be a shit underboss and people can fucking hate you, but because the boss is so respected, guys are going to leave you alone. And I'm not saying that that's the case here with Testa. But I also think that sometimes those that you work for or who are right above you keep you alive. I think that's just reality. But that's another mob murder that I wonder about sometimes because, Testa had been indicted on a huge loan sharking and racketeering indictment with Frank Narducci Sr., with Harry and Mario Riccobene, Pasquale Spirito, Joe Ciangelini, and just a whole bunch of other people. So there was a big indictment. I believe the feds called it Operation Gangplank or some shit like that. But so if Testa is not whacked with the nail bomb under the fucking porch, he might have gone away for 15 to 20 years. So this is another preemptive hit. And it's maybe something that Narducci and Casella could have waited on. I'm just not really sure. I wasn't there. I don't understand I understand the politics of it, trust me. But I just think that this is another example of, guys might have been able to wait it out and see what would happen, but they didn't. They moved on them, and the rest is sort of fucking history. And it is what it is. And that's exactly what put pretty much Nicky Scarfo in charge right there. All right, do you feel that Angelo Bruno was represented accurately in The Irishman? If not, can you elaborate a little? Love the show. I think it was a good job. I think Harvey Keitel was great. He's good in everything he does, and I think he played it right, low key, quiet. I think that Harvey Keitel probably played him a little more murderous than Angelo Bruno was in real life. I think he played it a little softer. I think one aspect of the film that I wanted to see more of was Angelo Bruno. I mean, I think that they made Tony Salerno way too more important, because I think in reality Tony Salerno wasn't the boss. Vinny the Gigante was the boss at the time. And I think that while Tony Salerno was made an integral part of that story, I really think the emphasis should have been on Frank Sheeran and Angelo Bruno, how they met, how they knew each other, and they just didn't cover a lot of that. Like I said, I saw the film when it first came out. I read the book. The book's better than the film. I like the film, but it's not going to go on my DVD shelf. I can tell you that much. But I think Harvey Keitel did a good job, and I think that's. I don't know. I just think at the end of the day, they focused on sort of the wrong things. All right. Jeff, I have to salute the Purple Dinosaur. I don't want to say his name. He is an example of how you do it and how you do it right. I mean, he's excellent. The man is a genius. Why don't the other families follow the leader on this one? Mr. I Love You, You Love Me, a.k.a. the Purple Dinosaur, is the new Carlo Gambino, hands down. I was obviously too young to witness Carlo's reign, but I think we got a version in this generation. I mean, look, we talk all the time on this show about archetypes, examples of men, alleged bosses, and I would agree with you 100% about the Purple Dinosaur. He's smart, low-key, dangerous, and he's been that way for a long time. This is nothing new. And a lot of people don't ask me about him that often. And look, I don't know the guy. Never met the guy. But, when I hear all of the mob gossip in New York and other places, because I hear all kinds of crazy shit, the one name that never comes up is that one. I'm in circles where guys, will talk about this murder, that murder. This one's, cocky. This one's a prick. But nobody mentions this guy. And I think that it goes back to Vinny the Chin. Vinny the Chin, they just point to the chin. They didn't even mention the guy's fucking name. You mentioned his name, he'd kill you. This is very similar. People don't talk about this guy. And I think when you have the respect of the people around you enough that they don't even talk about you publicly, that's a fucking good thing. It's a very good sign to me. It shows me he's respected, he's feared, he's admired. And guys that are treated that way are guys that have some longevity in the streets. What was it? I saw it the other day is... there was a picture of like all of these old gangsters that were still alive. This photo was probably taken back in the 80s or something, and it was a meme, and it said something like, "Beware of older men in a young man's game," because obviously that's telling you that if they're still around in the young man's game, then they're hardcore and serious, and I think that's how it's supposed to be. Nobody's supposed to talk about you. Nobody's supposed to mention you, and it seems like that particular person that you are talking about is pretty much rolling that way. All right, I know you don't like playing hypotheticals, but if Frankie Yale were to be alive when Luciano formed the commission, would he have been put in as a boss of one of the five families, or would Lucky Luciano have seen him as a problem and had him clipped with the rest of the mustache Pete's like Masseria and Maranzano? I don't know, but I tend to lean that he probably would have kept him around. Look, Frankie Yale had a lot of turf, was making a shitload of money. And I think Luciano would have seen him more as a counterpart versus an enemy. But the problem that Yale had was greed. And I don't think that would have been something that Luciano would have tolerated on any kind of level. Look, Frankie Yale was a dangerous guy, but he got outplayed by Al Capone. Purely and simply. And the fact that he stole from Capone, somebody he had known, somebody he had sent out to Chicago to work with... oh, fuck. Why am I having a brain fart today? Oh, Jesus. Man, this is a horrible fucking brain fart. Capone had sent him out to Chicago to begin with, to Johnny Torrio. There you go. And so, if he's going to rob Capone, what's to say that he wouldn't have tried to rob Luciano? And it probably would have ended up the same way. Sometimes guys are so smart, they're too smart, they get in their own fucking way. I've known a lot of guys in my life that were involved in organized crime, guys that were involved in drug dealing and other criminal stuff. And sometimes you're too smart and you get in your own fucking way. The minute you get in your own way, you're going to get pinched or you're going to make mistakes. So, if Frankie Yale had still been alive at the time, I mean, first of all, if you don't think that Luciano didn't sort of pass the flag and allow Frankie Yale to be hit, you're out of your fucking mind too. Because I don't think Al Capone did not have the power to come into New York and just kill at will. He really didn't. That would have had to have been passed around. That would have had to have been something acceptable. And the reason why is because Frankie Yale controlled the fucking docks in Brooklyn. He controlled everything. So to hit a guy like that, he's going to have to talk to some people. Otherwise, there's going to be repercussions. And by most accounts, from what historically has been said about Capone, is that he was a business guy. He was cutthroat as fuck, but he also knew to not just willy-nilly do things. So I would have to believe that probably Frankie Yale's murder, I'm not going to say it was sanctioned, but I think that people knew what was going to happen, and they just said, it's not our fucking problem. They probably didn't want it done on their turf, but, it is what it is. All right. Jeff, on one of the shows, I heard you talking about Ndrangheta being in New York. What do the five families think of them? Do they fight over rackets, and do the five families fear them due to the worldwide connection? All right, so I'm going to be a little careful on how I explain this. More or less, if we assume that Ndrangheta are here, which they are, I think it would be logical to assume that there's obviously business relationships and agreements that are put in place with different people. I would also speculate that probably Ndrangheta are attached to the five families as well in some sort of capacity. Look, it's business. Business is business. Money is money. I don't think, if you're asking a question, is Ndrangheta operating on their own, doing whatever they want? No, that's not the case. But they've been here for a long time. This is like, you can go back to the 80s, and there was a whole crew that was in Ndrangheta. So it's not like they haven't been here. They are here, but they're not acting on their own. They would be acting complicit within one of the five families, or at least attached to one. But we're not talking about 350 Ndrangheta here. It's not like that. But they are here. I can tell you that for a fact. All right. If a family decides to have the books closed for a very long time, does it make it more likely that they would go defunct or no longer active? Is that how these smaller families like in Dallas and other places end up going extinct? And what are your thoughts on that? I don't think so. I mean, look, we've argued about this for a long time. Let's take Jimmy Burke and Joe Watts, for example, okay? Neither one of them guys were made. Oh, and by the way, if I hear one motherfucker on fucking YouTube say that Joe Watts is German, he's fucking Welsh. I do not you're gonna say you were a gangster and all this. You don't even fucking know that. Joe Watts was not fucking German. They called him the German as a fucking nickname. He was Welsh. Do you know what Welsh is? You dumb fucking snitch fuck. If you don't, I suggest you look it up. Okay? You call yourself a gangster. How do you not know that? Fucking shitheel. Sorry, I just had to say that. But let's talk about Joe Watts and Jimmy Burke. Neither one of these guys were made. All right? But they were highly feared, highly motivated, highly fucking respected. Nobody was going to touch either one of them guys. And it proves that getting made, albeit could be an honorable thing, isn't necessary. If you can make money and you're willing to whack whoever you got to whack, then why would you put yourself in a situation to be made? I'm not saying that being made is a bad thing. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But if you're sort of going to get the same benefits out of it and not get made, what's the difference? Look, me personally, I would rather make a ton of money and be feared and keep my shit moving than to get a title. A title doesn't do it for me. It never has. I know guys who are high associates who terrify made guys. Respect is respect. That's the bottom line. And I think a lot of the areas that sort of did go defunct have gone that way for several reasons. Politics is the main thing, and we harp on that all the time on the show. If you cannot control police, you cannot control city and local government, forget it. It's over. If you cannot get somebody on city council, forget about it. The true power is in politics. And when the mob lost to politics, and when the mob lost the willingness to murder, there you go. And I'm not knocking them. I'm just being honest with you. Just being honest with you. But if you're going to be in the streets, you can be a Joe Watts. You could be a fucking Jimmy Burke. Still get all the benefits and making tons of fucking money and killing guys and doing what you got to do. And nobody's going to fuck with you because your fucking reputation comes before everything else. If you're feeding guys, putting money and food on the table for them, and they know that if God willing, the fucking war horns go off and you're going to fucking kill people if you got to, that's a guy that doesn't matter if he's made. Who's going to tell Jimmy Burke go fuck himself? Nobody. Who's going to tell Joe Watts go fuck himself? Nobody. Because their reputation spoke it very fucking clear. Who's going to tell Tommy Patera go fuck himself? Nobody. Because if you did, there were repercussions for that. So, getting made? Listen, I know a lot of guys that fucking, one in particular that is not from South Philly, it's somebody in New York that said to me, why the fuck do I want that? I'm making X, Y, and Z a month. I'm happy. I'm content. My money's going well. Push comes to shove. I'm willing to do what I got to do physically and violently. The fuck I need a title for? Nobody's fucking with them. So, I mean, so you could probably argue that either way. But to me, if it's just about making money and defending yourself and your friends, what the fuck you care? What the fuck you care? You know, and that's not to say that it's not an honorable thing. It is. But it's just, I think, today, guys, listen, you hear this all the time, and this is another thing that people always say to me is, oh, a boss this, boss that. Who the fuck wants to be a boss? Who wants that pressure? One guy fucking farts in Egypt with your name, and you're done. You're done. So who wants that position? I'm not saying that position's not a respected position. I'm not saying it's not an earned, but who wants that? If you're a fucking captain, what the fuck you care? Everybody's kicking up to you anyway. Don't take the fucking heat. What's going to be the difference between moving up a position to a captain to a boss? Okay, all the money. There you go, more money. But how many times have we seen a situation where a guy's a captain, he's making X, Y, and Z, depending on where he lives, anywhere between $500,000 to over $1 million a year after kicking up. What the fuck does he need to put himself up a little bit higher for more money? There's power, prestige, ego. I get all of that. But the real slick guys, the real slick motherfuckers in this life are the guys that recognize where they're at. They're content with where they're at. They don't want no more notoriety. They don't want no more accolades. They just want to keep doing what they've always done, keep making the money, and listen, captains are powerful people. They're not fucking weaklings. They're not guys you can push around. They're powerful guys. So, you know, so for anybody that tells you they don't want to be boss, sometimes I laugh at that. Yeah, of course you want to be boss. Everybody wants to be the boss of something. But I think there are real guys that don't want that responsibility. They don't want that heat. Those are the smart ones. The guys that are on the bottom that keep wanting to aim for the top, those are the guys that get fucking found in the gutters, shot and killed. Those are the guys that go to prison. The guys that just keep it moving like a well-oiled machine are the guys that are in this thing their entire lives. 30 years, 40 years. And don't do a ton of time. They have more time on the streets than they got in the can. Just saying. All right. Is one certain family aligned more with the other? For example, during Carlo Gambino's era, the Gambinos and the Bonanos really didn't get along that well. During Gotti's time, they seemed to have a better relationship. Look, certain families are tighter than others. Some have more functional business ties than others. Sometimes families outside New York are repped on the commission by other mob families. So it just, most of the time, in certain situations, that's the case. I think it's just business. Some guys' personalities mesh better than others. And that's just the reality of it. You know, I think every family at one time or another had business dealings together, got along together, and there's other times when they go to war. So, all right. Why hasn't somebody made a movie on the Nicky Scarfo era of the Philly mob? I don't know. I think, and I'm going to probably get the title of this film wrong, but there was a film made called 10th and Wolf or some shit like that. It was absolutely fucking horrible. And I think the most logical answer to this is that outside of Hollywood, you know, everybody knows Philadelphia's had a strong core, but I think Hollywood only recognizes the Fab Five in New York. New York is a big playground for Hollywood, and I think that if somebody ever made a film based on a Philly mob, I think it would be pretty brutal and violent, and I think that's the way you would have to do it. And obviously there was a story there, but I just don't know if Nicky Scarf was the right choice. I mean, if you did something that began as Bruno gets whacked, and then you have a 10 or 15 year period where you're showing a lot of shooting going on back and forth, I think that's a good story. But is that what people want to see? You know, because a lot of that's politics and shooting, and is that what people want to see? You know, a lot of people have come to me and they said, listen, you know, they ought to make a movie on Joey Merlino, and you know, my opinion is, you know, sure, I'd be intrigued to see something like that. And some people even, believe it or not, this is true, that some people came to me, nobody of consequence, and asked me to pen some sort of fucking Philadelphia gangster film that dealt with Joey Merlino, and it's just not something I want to. First of all, that's not something I want to do. It intrigues me always, but it just, I think if you don't have a film that doesn't show the politics of the streets, then how many mob films have you ever seen where they show the politics of the streets? Not many. You know, it's always this one fucked this one's wife, this one stole my money, this one's a fucking rat. Very rarely do you ever see a film where they get into the politics of why guys are having problems. You know, Philadelphia is like a fucking time warp. You know, New York has an enclave, but South Philadelphia is nothing but one big enclave. You know, but will they ever make a Philly Mafia movie? You know what? I don't know. I don't know if they can do it where it would make logistical sense. You know, me personally, if I was having a private conversation about this, I would tell you how you can do it and what would make it successful, you know, but it just, you got to pick the right time period, you know, and that's the whole thing. All right. How much influence does the mob have in the military? Say within the West Pac out of San Diego. An aircraft carrier moves. There are 5,000 men on the ship alone. Now a carrier moves in a group. I don't think. So here's my thing. How much influence do they have on the military? So I'm gonna have to weave my way around this a little bit. So just straight up, hear me out on this. Initially, I'm going to say not really a lot, to be honest with you. They're not going to be able to like make a phone call and stop a naval ship, obviously. But if you look back in the old days, like in the 60s, and I'm going to give you an example of this. When my father first entered the military, he was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, right? And in those days, Norfolk, Virginia was a military town, still is, but it was a jazz city. It was a jazz club spot. And my father told me when he was 19 years old or 18 years old at the time, and he arrived, you know, he could see Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Sinatra, that all of those people played in the jazz clubs down there. And the mob at the time did control a lot of things down in that area. So if a sailor was looking for something that he couldn't get, there was always somebody to talk to get it. And, you know, ultimately times would change there. And then obviously he would be shipped back to Newport, Rhode Island, where he would end up meeting my mother, et cetera, et cetera. So from that perspective, in the old days, I think the mob, as far as being able to get stuff from military guys is one thing. But if you're looking for, you know, like them stopping shipping lanes and stuff, that I don't think that was possible. But here's a couple of things that probably a lot of people don't know. Pete Maggio was a guy who, let me try to put it this way. Pete Maggio was a guy who secured a $203,000 contract to supply milk to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, as well as to the Philadelphia Naval Yard. So quality and sanitary deficiencies were later discovered and reported. So my point is like, if the mob is looking to make money off the military, that's always sort of happened. Look at Bill Medico, and he was a Russell Buffalino associate. He was general manager of Medico Industries in Luzerne County. In 1968, Medico Industries received a $3.9 million defense contract to produce 600,000 missile warheads for rockets to be used in Viet fucking Nam. earlier, that same firm secured a contract to produce tank parts for U.S. Army vehicles. Nick Piccolo, he was a capo regime in the Angelo Bruno crime family. In 1967, two companies that were owned by Piccolo received contracts from the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard and the Naval Engineering Center for a total of over $900,000. The majority of people that were employed by that company all were felons and criminals. And so if there is a way that the mob can make money off the military, they're going to do it. They've always done it. Specifically, though, you look at Russell Bufalino. He's shipping tank parts. He's got a subcontract company, a defense fund contract company that is making warheads for fucking missiles and rockets. So the idea that the mob wasn't profiteering off of that is out of your mind. And I think the fact that money to defense contracting was directly tied back to Bufalino and in many ways makes him a lot more powerful than a lot of people thought, but it also drops sort of a question in our lap. And the question is becoming, if he was working for the government and to that extent, that sort of starts to head us into a gray area. And I don't want to go where everybody thinks I'm going to go with that. That kind of starts to lead us in a gray area a little bit. And we're just going to leave that there for today as far as that question sort of goes. But the mob's always made money off the military, but they don't got no control over the military. All right, was Tony Salerno's relationship with the Chin better than what Neil Dellacroce to Castellano and Gambino? I think so. Tony Salerno, I think, was respected his role, respected the life, respected those around him. Not that Neil Dellacroce didn't. I just don't think that Dellacroce saw things one way. I just think, look, Dellacroce sees it one way, Castellano saw it another. And I recently came across a wiretap transcript in which Dellacroce was prepared to go to war with Castellano. At least that's what he was lamenting about on tape, which means on some level there was likely some sort of disdain for how Castellano was behaving and acting, at least being perceived to act. I don't think Gotti was alone in his disdain for Castellano. I mean, let's just put it that way. In terms of Salerno, I just don't think he was on a different sort of level than Dellacroce. They each had their own characteristics, but I think Salerno was more about business. Let's keep it going. Put the personal shit aside. And I think Dellacroce tried to do all of that, but I just think that Dellacroce found himself in the middle of a bunch of drama. Too many politics. Too much, poor Dellacroce is in the middle of all these guys fighting. It couldn't have been an easy thing for him. But ultimately, did he do the right thing? I mean, he did what he thought he had to do. How important was the geography of the city that gave power to the family in the city? Are port cities the most important to the mob? Because you had to pass through an island city, did that make it more of an important city? Okay, so this is something that I know a lot about. It's something I've never talked about before, ever publicly, but I'm going to today. And I think that the question is a great observation. And I think, Carlo Gambino and those before him and a couple after him, they understood the power of the docks. They understood the power of controlling shipping ports. When you can control the influx, the pricing, there's a lot of money to be made. And this is probably why I'm a little shocked that Baltimore, Maryland never really became a mob haven. Florida, Norfolk, Virginia. Now listen very closely here, and then I'm going to get into a couple of details here. Florida, Norfolk, Virginia, New York, Boston were the main areas. Norfolk, Virginia, despite what a lot of people don't know or may know, is that port was controlled directly by Carlo Gambino. And he had a relative, a cousin that was down that direction, who I knew. I think he's still alive, and he can. Okay, let me phrase it this way: Carlo Gambino had a relative down there that was overseeing a bunch of stuff. Gambino's guy, I think it was his second cousin or third cousin, something like that. I knew him, and I also knew the guy that he put in charge of the Longshoremen's Union very, very well. In fact, this guy is in his 70s. He's still fucking alive. I know him very well. I haven't talked to him in about a year, but he controlled the fucking Longshoremen's Union. He controlled everything, and he told me time and time again, that Carlo, and he called him Carlo Gambini, and he would call him a WAP. And he would tell me that Carlo Gambini controlled everything. If they wanted this shut down or that shut down, the call would come from Gambini's people, and it would be fucking shut down. People will disagree with me on this, but this guy controlled everything on the docks and in the port. He was a ruffian, and there was a lot of shakedowns, a lot of bribes going on. And why this never ever got reported down there, I really don't fucking know. And I believe he was the head of those unions from like the late 60s through the 80s. I'm not going to mention his name, but it was the ports are controlled by Carlo Gambino completely. Not anything moved union-wise or on those docks without Gambino getting a cut, without Gambino directing which way it was going to go. That's the fucking truth. If you want to challenge me on that, I can show you some documents. All right. Let's see. What's up, Jeff? Have you heard of the Bosa family, the NFL football players that related to Tony Accardo, great-grandsons, I believe? Yeah, I heard. It is what it is. I heard. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. I haven't really researched it. Good for them. All right. We often hear you use the term street boss, sitting boss, acting boss. Could you explain what is meant by and the differences between the terms in relation to a boss of a family? So, a street boss would be a guy who gives directives on behalf of the boss. A sitting boss is usually the guy acting as the boss or somebody that is just put in place because the actual boss is locked up or on the lam or whatever. An acting boss is really the same thing, but that's the guy who's officially recognized as the acting boss. Sometimes it's because the actual boss is locked up. Then there's the front boss who's really not the boss, but he's made to look like the boss, so the real boss can insulate himself. So there you go. All right, does New York still decide who becomes boss in other cities such as New Orleans? I don't know. I couldn't tell you that I don't know. I think that was the way that it was done in the old days. I don't think there's much emphasis on that today. I think, and I'm not saying it's this way, but I think like Philadelphia, New Jersey, they need to do their own fucking thing. I don't think they need permission from anybody in New York to do what they want to do. I think that that's the wrong. I think that should have changed, and it hasn't, at least from certain perspectives. But I don't know. All right, you're the boss of the Genovese family at the sit-down with Antonio Caponegro and Funzi Thierry after the Bruno murder. Caponegro repeatedly states that he sat and got the nod from Thierry. How do you handle it? How do you as a boss roll? Well, here's the problem. The first issue is that Funzi Thierry is very valuable to me. He makes a lot of fucking money for me. So I have to look at things logically. No matter what Funzi Thierry supposedly did, I have a guy that's sitting in front of me admitting that he killed another boss without it being sanctioned. So that act in and of itself is against the rules. And from my point of view, regardless of whether Thierry said, yeah, all right, go ahead and do it, it doesn't matter to me. Caponegro knew he shouldn't have done it. He should have been more intelligent enough to get somebody collectively to tell him that. I mean, why would he just assume that was okay? You know what I mean? And so I think that the fact that Caponegro doesn't really get implicit permission from more than one person, it's his own fault. So I would have ordered his death the same as Vinny Gigante did. The difference would have been is I would have put Thierry aside and I would have said, listen, I can't prove that you told the guy it was all right to do, but you're going to fucking pay a huge fine for this. I would fine the guy. Because even though you can't lose Thierry as a huge earner, he was still a respected guy, but you fine him just to let him know and keep him in check of not to play fucking games. That's what I would have done. That's not what really was done. Who knows? All right, the rule is if I touch a made man, I die. Is this rule still current? Whoever said that was a rule? That's Hollywood for you. Look, I wouldn't suggest doing it. But I think it's another Hollywood bullshit thing. There's so many rules and codes and standards that people believe are real that aren't. Look, I've known people that were not made guys that punched made guys, and nothing happened. An argument maybe, but then there's another argument to like what Paulie Galino did when he smacked Anthony Spiro. Spiro killed every single one of them. So, there's something to be said for that. But I think that there's a lot of a lot of bastardized Hollywood versions of events, and there's a lot of rumors and gossip that aren't true. I wouldn't advise smacking anybody that's a tough guy. That's number one. Number two, if you're not involved in that life, I wouldn't put my hands on somebody. But there's been times where that shit's happened. Just because that guy has a fucking title, this may upset some friends of mine. Or some people I know. Just because a guy has a title doesn't mean I'm going to respect him. I think that that's something that's earned. I think that if you come at me like a gentleman, we're going to get along fine. You're easygoing with me, honest with me. I'm going to be easygoing and honest with you. The minute that you think that your station in life is above who I am, I don't give a fuck. That may not be the smartest thing the way to live, but just because you're a this or that doesn't mean I'm going to kiss your ass. I've never been like that. Now, does that transfer to, like, say, a boss? That's a little different with me. But then again, I've never met a boss of a crime family that was a fucking asshole either. They're always nice, quiet guys. That's just how they fucking are. But no, I'm not intimidated by anybody's position in life. Just because you're a chef or you're a fucking this or you're a fucking auto mechanic doesn't mean I'm going to like the auto mechanic even better than the chef. If you're an asshole, you're an asshole. So the idea of who you are, I should automatically respect you, isn't going to happen. In certain situations, that has happened because somebody's reputation precedes them. But normally, for me, I make a decision on if you're a good guy and you treat me well, then that's what you're going to get. What you do for a living has no juxtaposition on how I treat you. You could be a non-mafia guy. You could be an associate. You could be a fucking crumb bum. If you're cool to me, we're cool. It doesn't matter to me. I think the misunderstanding with me is, I don't give a fuck if a guy's in the mob or not. If I like you, I like you. I hang out with all kinds of different people. Just so happens that the majority of people that I'm around are street guys. And listen, they do what they do. That has no effect on my life. I can like somebody and smoke a cigar or fucking smoke a cigarette or have a beer with them and shoot the shit about fucking sports. I don't look at them like they're creatures of they're not Rudolph Valentino. These are normal fucking guys. They just happen to do something that's a little different than everybody else. But that's not the crux of my conversations with them. And every single, I would say that 85% of the guys I'll even go higher. 95% of the guys that I've met that are active in that life are very nice guys. They don't look to fucking drag you into nothing. They don't look to get you involved in politics. They're not dicks. But there are 0.5% that are absolute fucking jerk-offs. And they're jerk-offs for whatever fucking reason that they want to be jerk-offs. And that's my thing, is that you can be in the streets half your fucking life, grow up in that fucking life. At some point, you're taught respect in your life. And what I mean by respect is just because you are who you are doesn't mean anybody should have to kiss your ass. You get more, what is the old saying? You get more flies with honey or whatever the fuck it is. And that's my point. So when somebody comes off like a fucking dick to me, and it's happened, and I've come off like a dick to other people. When you come off like a dick to me, I got no respect for you, and I don't give a fuck what your position is. You're a dick, you're a dick. I'm not going to fucking tremble in my fucking shoes because you're this, that, and the third. I'm just not. You and I think it's how people treat people. The minute that you think you're so fucking big and bad and tough, and people should respect me because I'm this and this and this, you ain't going to get no respect from anybody. The way you get respect is by treating people with kindness and understanding. And if you got to be tough, you're tough. If you've got to state your opinion, how you feel on certain things, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to be a fucking dick, no, I'm not having it. I'm not having it. And the way that I deal with that is I just, go fuck yourself. And that's it. You're not going to scare me. And that's the other thing. Somebody once said to me, and I'm not going to tell you who it was. I was someplace and this guy says to me, how come you don't mention me? I said, what the fuck would I mention you for? Well, that's a good thing. Don't mention me. And then he looks at me and he says, you know what your problem is, Jeff? I said, I don't know. I'm sitting here across from you. That's probably a fucking problem. And he's like, no. Your problem is you're not afraid of anybody. And he kind of laughed about it. He's busting my balls. But the thing is, why do I need to be afraid? What am I doing that's dangerous? What am I doing that's going to insult nobody? What, I got to be afraid of somebody just because of their reputation? It's just not, come on. You got two ways you can approach me. You can be nice about it or you can be a jerk off about it. And if you think I'm going to back down because of your station in life, listen, that's not a tough guy routine. And it's not a smart way to live. But it's just within me. Because my friend this guy, that I'm talking about right this second, gives me such good advice on everything. Smart as a whip, this guy. Always fucking tells me, don't pay attention to these people. They're nitwits, they're crumb bums, they're pigeons, they're this, they're this, they're this. Let people that like you, people that don't like you, fuck them. What do you care? What do you care? You don't ever got to explain yourself to anybody. And he's right. And it's what's funny about that is that originally, when I met this guy, I don't think he liked me very much. I'll be honest with you. I know he didn't. Because there was some misunderstandings about some things, and that's my fault. I readily admitted that. Listen, I'm not going to ever fucking bow down, kowtow to nobody, and I'm not going to pretend, oh, I didn't do that. You're fucking nuts. You're delusional. Because that's not the case. I did something that was offended somebody, and so, you own up to that. You own up to that. So this particular person, gives me great advice about life, and it's strange sometimes because this particular person isn't tremendously older than me. This person is older than me, but not by 40 years or nothing crazy like that. But he gives good advice. And when I hear the advice, I marvel at the intelligence this person has. Because a lot of people think mob guys are dumb, but you got it wrong. These guys are very fucking bright. They're bright guys. And they say what they mean and mean what they say. I respect a guy who doesn't fucking mince words. If a guy's got a beef with me and he comes up to me and he says, you know what, I got a fucking problem with you. This is what my problem is. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. That's fine. When you come to me, though, and you're like, you're a fucking jerk off. You're this, you're this, you're this. And you don't even give me the respect to allow myself to talk to you and ask you what specifically your problem is, then you're not. Then really you're a bully, and I got no time for the bullshit. I've said it 100 times. I don't have time for people who are fucking delusional. I just don't. And I'm not talking about anybody specifically. I'm just talking about life. So, I got off on a tangent there. Sorry about that. But it is what it is. It is what it is. Are you going to come back on my show soon? This is Scott from the True Crime Podcast. Yeah. Whenever you want me to come on, Scott, definitely. I have no problem doing that. If you don't listen to Scott's show, he covers kind of serial killers and stuff like that and murders that are unsolved. That is called the True Crime. Oh, God, I'm going to get his fucking show title wrong. The True Crime Page Podcast. There you go. So check that out, please. You said you had some horror movie themed tattoos, if I recall. Can you show us some pictures of them? No. And the reason why I don't is because it's bad enough that when I was young, I thought getting tattoos was a smart thing. Don't get me wrong. I love my tattoos. I've got something like 40 tattoos. Most of them are horror movies like like Nosferatu, The Mummy, The Wolfman, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Frankenstein, Dracula, I said The Wolfman, right? Creature from the Black Lagoon. I like old horror movies. I wanted to get one on Jimmy Cagney because I'm a Cagney fan. So is my friend. He's a Cagney fan too. But the reason why I don't is because when I was younger, one of the things and one of the reasons why we didn't get tattoos, first of all, I'm going to tell you this. I'm the only one of my 5 siblings that has tattoos. The other ones are all straight-laced. I'll never forget when I came home with it. My father was a military guy, so when I came home, he goes, Jesus Christ, son, you're going to get AIDS. What are you doing? I said, what, Pops? No big deal. It's a fucking 4-leaf clover. I'm half Irish. What the fuck? He goes, oh, well, at least you didn't put no Dago shit on your fucking arm yet. He goes, I'll give it time. You're going to do it. I know you are. Because my father used to like to tease me all the time. He used to like to tell me that being half Italian and half Irish, all my shit genes were the Italian side. All my positive genes were the Irish side. He was just a ball buster by trade. Him and somebody else I know would have gotten along quite well because there's this other guy I know who fucking hates the Irish. And I know he's listening to this. And he's, I don't fucking hate the Irish. Get the fuck out of here, you fucking nut. I never said that. And I keep manipulating that conversation with this guy because it's funny to me. I like to bust his balls because he can sit there and tell you all day long, no, you got no problem with the Irish. Bullshit. This guy doesn't like Irish people, so... I swear to God, I'm going to send this guy I'm going to send him Irish everything. Irish T-shirts, Irish hats. We'll get him some 4-leaf clover stickers. Let him put them on his car. Yeah, he'll end up biting off my fucking nose, too. Oh, jeez. But no, you're not supposed to put pictures of your tattoo. They're identifying features, and so that pretty much ruined my days of crime, right? Because I can only imagine with these tattoos some of the nicknames I would get. Oh, the werewolf, the Frankenstein. They would say all kinds of things. All right, what is your favorite kind of dog breed? I've always been partial to Labrador Retrievers, I'll be honest with you. Because listen, growing up as a kid, we had Shetland sheepdogs, Shelties, we had them, and then we had Labs. That's the direction my family moved in. And then as I got a little older, it was Rottweilers and Dobermans. I think at one point with an ex-girlfriend removed years ago, I think we had 2 Rottweilers, a fucking Doberman, and she was always a Rottweiler person, and I really came to love the Rottweiler breed because they're very protective of small children, they're very protective of your family, but they can be a handful. She had a dog named Malachi who was a German Rottweiler, and the difference is that an American Rottweiler is big, but German Rottweilers are fucking insanely big, and she would always tell me around Malachi not to wear flip-flops because he liked to play with flip-flops. What I didn't, and keep in mind, this dog was 160 pounds. He was no fucking joke. And she would always tell me, don't wear flip-flops. You know what's going to happen. Yeah, what's he going to do? Well, this fucking dog would yank me off my feet in 3 seconds because he wanted to flip-flop. So he would put his big fucking mouth around my feet and completely pull me and yank me in the air off my feet, drag me into the middle of the fucking yard, and start attacking me. Not biting me hard, but just play biting. But he would want those flip-flops something fucking fierce. And he would go to the extreme of, he was very smart. He'd charge at me. He'd try to knock me over first. And if he couldn't do that, he would yank me so fucking hard. He'd yank me right off my fucking feet in the air by the cuff of my jeans. And then he'd go to town proceeding to rip my fucking flip-flops off. So, I stopped wearing flip-flops around him. But of all the breeds, I think Labs are probably the safest. But, I'm partial to Rottweilers too. All right. Let's see what we've got over here. Oh, Jesus Christ. What I'm doing right now is I'm scanning through because there's a couple of questions that I probably should answer, but there's a couple that I just think that... See, sometimes I get questions, for those of you that are wondering what the fuck I'm doing. Sometimes I get questions, and what I do is I click, copy, and paste them into another file. I don't answer them. I load them up, and I usually go through them, but sometimes some of them can be very convoluted, and I can't answer them in 4 seconds or 5 seconds or a minute even. And sometimes they ask some shit that I'm just not willing to divulge. So I'm just scanning through. Okay, Bugsy Moran and Dino Banyan were part of the same organization, but who do you think was more powerful, respected, and feared? Probably Bugs Moran, totally. While different men, Moran was a smarter guy. I think he was tougher. Look, anybody could pull 12 pounds of pressure right on a trigger, but a guy who can outthink his enemies, above all else, is somebody more valuable to me. Listen, you can't solve everything with mayhem, and it seems like from everything I've ever read about O'Banion is he was all about mayhem and not about brains. All right. People have said that the outfit was worried about Sam Momo Giancana talking. What person or persons was afraid of him talking, and what reason did he give to talk? It likely probably would have been Paul Rica and Tony Accardo that had the beef with him for multiple reasons. I don't think anybody really ever thought that he would talk. I just think that they wanted him to shut his fucking mouth. He was a little too high profile, and we're going to talk a little bit about that whole high profile with Sam Giancana today. He was a little too high profile. He wasn't sort of staying out of sight. He was creating friction. He was bitching about the Kennedys. He was seen with the Kennedys at the Cal-Neva Lodge, which we're going to talk about today. And I just think that it became a situation where Giancana was the link to a lot of things that people didn't want to be linked to. All right, did Angelo Dundee and the fight doctor Bernie Pacheco have mafia ties? I'm sure they did. As a matter of fact, I know they did. But boxing's always been controlled by the mob. It always will be. Anybody who tells you otherwise just isn't being honest with you. So absolutely. All right. In your opinion, do you think any of the cities that they say the mob families are defunct in quietly have something going on? I think any city that's now defunct is probably going to stay that way. Many of these locations, they couldn't hold on to turf. And like I said it earlier, the minute you lose political clout, a lot of these places had a hard time keeping up. You still have places like Dallas, which still have mob crews. They're still there. But are they what they were? No. All right, it's been reported that Gaspipe was offered the position of boss in the Lucchese's, but Vic said he said Vic would be better suited. Do you think he was just manipulating Vic to be the front man while he actually called the shots and stayed off the Fed's radar? Yeah, I think so. Look, and I said this earlier, a lot of guys, say they don't ever want to be boss, but reality is some guys do. They just don't want the heat from the feds. For instance, and this is something that the federal government has alleged, not me, so don't come at me. They've alleged that Joey Merlino put Ralph Natale in charge, at least out front, so that Natale could take the heat off Merlino. Meanwhile, Merlino, according to the feds, ran the crime family. And look at the end result of that. Staffa goes away, Natale becomes a Dracula cunt, and who's still the alleged boss there? So I think there's something to be said for a guy who manipulates another guy into thinking he's the boss, but then secretly kind of stands back and says, all right, let's just push him out front. We'll do what we got to do. Let him take the pinch. It's a smart fucking move. It's Machiavellian in every sense of the imagination. If we agree with that philosophy, it shows you how fucking stupid Natale was. And this is, I think, why when people tend to say disparaging crap about Joey Merlino to me or around me, I get a little bent. I get a little pissed off. I get a little heated by the shit. I don't have to defend that guy. I have no reason to defend that guy. I don't have to defend that guy. But I do because I think that Joey over the years has taken a lot of shots, at least from the government, and a lot of shots from fucking big mouth street guys. I think he's taken a lot of shots and a lot of hits from the press. Listen, I told you before, if they could blame Joey Merlino for fucking catching Goofy's fucking hand in Mickey Mouse's pants in a soiled bathroom at a fucking gas station in Oklahoma, they're going to do it. I think that who Joey is at his core is not what the public understands, not what the public can accept, because the public doesn't know. They can call him the John Gotti of Passyunk Avenue and all this kind of nonsense and bullshit. You think Joey gave himself that moniker? I can guarantee you, and I could say this with 100% confidence, I could guarantee you he didn't give himself that fucking nickname. Because I know certain things to know well enough and know that Joey's not going to call himself that. I think a lot of assertions have been made about the guy. I think the public perception is one thing. I think the fact that people have used Joey's charitable stuff as sort of a Nino Brown type of fucking. I hate to goddamn use that comparison. I apologize, Joey, if you hear this. I'm not trying to compare you to Nino Brown at all. I'm just saying that I think when you do good things for people during the holidays, the feds kind of look at that as, it's like the Robin Hood. But if you knew Joey, you'd know. I mean, he's a God-fearing guy, cares about people's families. Anytime I've ever talked to the guy in my life, how are you? How's your family? It's never about him. Some street guys, it's always about me. You know what I mean? And Joey's not that type of guy. He's not. Every time especially if we go back to his trial, this guy's fighting for his life. He doesn't got to give a fuck about me or my family or nothing. Every day. Hey, what do you think today? How's your family? God bless. He's a good guy. So I think that there's a lot of disconnect between what the truth is and what the reality is. And for the people that are saying disparaging, nonsensical, stupid, delusional shit, you obviously have never met the guy. You don't know the guy. But at the same time I say that, you're obviously not going to have the balls to say it to him either. And that's what always kills me about this fucking subject, is that these people that all want to say this nonsense aren't going to say it to him. Why aren't they going to say it to him? I'll let you figure that one out. But I know better. I'm not going to let nobody say nothing bad about the guy. He's been nothing but good to me. And listen, I don't owe him a fucking thing. He don't owe me a fucking thing. It's just, I guess that's my personality and how I fucking do things. All right. Did Sammy Gravano ever want to whack Greg Scarpa? I saw a clip from the Families of the Mafia show on MTV where Linda Scarpa said this to Karen Gravano. Any truth to this, or is this more reality TV bullshit? I don't know Linda Scarpa. I have had some interactions with her before, and I've always really felt bad for Linda. She's not a liar. I think she's always taken a ton of shit for what her father did. And listen, I'm not justifying anything that her father Greg did or what her brother did or whatever. But I sort of have a soft spot for Linda Scarpa, and I always have. I don't know what the specific allegation by Linda was, but Linda's not a liar. She never really has been. And I can tell you this much about her. She's not going to put herself on a reality show for no reason. She doesn't crave the attention or adoration from anybody. She's a fairly classy woman, and completely, utterly different than Karen Gravano, for sure. Linda's always, sort of acknowledged what her father did was repulsive. She has, unfortunately, living for the sins of the father. She's had to pay for what her father has done her whole life, and that's not fair to her. I get it, and I understand it. I understand Greg Scarpa's still her father, but at the end of the day, she shouldn't have to pay for what her father did. I've always liked Linda. I've always thought that she was smart. She was honest, but she is not Karen Gravano, that's for sure. So if Linda Scarpa truly said to Karen Gravano, whatever you quoted earlier, then I have to believe it, because Linda's never given me a reason to ever think she was a lying sack of shit. Gravano, every time she opens her mouth, is a lying sack of shit. So there you go. All right, are you going to do a show on Sonny Francis? Someday, yes. What about Jagleg's Diamond and his story? I already covered him already. Go ahead and check through the catalog of things that we have. Why did poison never become a popular mafia weapon? I really don't know. You would think they would have, because they used that back in the fucking medieval days and shit like that. So I don't understand why they wouldn't. All right, what's the story on Johnny Gongs from Philadelphia? I mean, what exactly? Okay, so what's the story on Johnny Gongs? So what exactly do you want to know? The who, what, when, where, and why? And listen, I'm going to stay away from this one because, listen, you hear a lot of things, and personally, I didn't know the guy. I'm not going to get involved in that nonsense. They keep bringing it up. But from what I kind of understand and from what I've heard, whatever happened to him was deserved. I've heard a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different reasons, a lot of stories. I have my own opinion, and I just think people should leave that shit alone. What allegedly he did, or what he allegedly had done to some people, would have put him in a serious predicament. And it wasn't just one thing, it was several things. And sometimes things are justified, as painful as it is. I'm not justifying murder, but sometimes people get what's coming to them. You act brazen, and you say and do things that anger people, inflame people, disrespect people, their families, etc., etc. You have a tendency of getting put in your place, and that's exactly what happened to him, and I could give a fuck less. All right, do you know much about Rocco Arrico? Yes, the Australian ex-mafia boss. We have a show coming up about him and the Madaffries. So if you're from Australia, we are going to talk about the Madaffries. It is coming. What rank is higher, consigliere or underboss? It depends on what family you're working for, but usually the underboss. Tony Accardo crime family versus Carlo Gambino family. Who you got, Jeff? Love the show. Gambino, and I say that because he just controlled too many men, too many places. Not that Accardo didn't, but the big difference between controlling Chicago versus New York and the whole Eastern Seaboard, big difference. Have you ever considered doing a show on Cerrone from Chicago? He was Accardo's right. Are you talking about Jackie Cerrone? But yeah, we have a whole entire thing, the history of organized crime in Chicago, that is coming. This is a long one, an in-depth one, but it is coming. Have you ever talked about the Cal-Neva Lodge? Well, that's what we are going to talk about today after we finish up the questions. Who did the most damage to the Mafia, Sammy the Fool or Joe Pistone? Sammy Gravano, hands down. Have you ever eaten at Pizza Nostra in Totowa, New Jersey? Would you be willing to stop in there while you're in the area? This is the Mafia restaurant owned by Karen Gravano and Ramona Rizzo. For what I understand, it was opened up and closed right the fuck down. To my knowledge, it's not even in operation anymore. It didn't last long at all. This is another example of two pinheads. Not that Ramona Rizzo's a pinhead. I kind of like Ramona. The other one's a fucking pig. They didn't know how to operate a business. But from what I understand, it was open for a few months, then went bankrupt. I don't know if that's true or not. That's what I heard. But what I can tell you something nobody knows. I know that the day they opened, they found 12 dead rats on the front pavement outside the door. I don't think anybody knows that, but I know that. All right, so that's going to be all the questions for today. We are going to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about the Cal-Neva Lodge. On a given week, I'm out of town a lot. Whether it's Philadelphia, it's New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, wherever the case may be, I'm always looking for a place where I can sit down and have a great dinner. Ambiance is key, price is obviously key, but the most important thing is the food good? And there's a place I want to tell you about today. It's called Saltwater at Margate. If you are going down to the shore, because I know a lot of people in Philadelphia go to the shore, especially Margate, you're missing out on a great restaurant if you haven't been there. The name is Saltwater Margate. It's at 9401 Ventnor Avenue, Margate City, New Jersey. The phone number there is 609-289-8078. You can also visit them online at saltwatermargate.com. This place is unbelievable. Not only is the food absolutely superb, the price is great too. They're renowned for their pizza and their gnocchi. They have all kinds of different things from mussels to roast pork and Italian fare. So do yourself a favor, do me a favor, go and visit Saltwater Margate. You will not be disappointed. It is a place that I think at some point, if not already, there's going to be lines out the door and around the block. So if you're down on the shore, stop in, go to Saltwater Margate. At least check them out online at saltwatermargate.com. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio, and we are talking about the Cal-Neva Lodge. Now, why is this important? The reason why it's important is because this was really the main meeting place for Sam Giancana, the Kennedys, Sinatra, and a lot of things that would come down the pike, especially with the Kennedys and Sinatra and Giancana, would sort of take place and be rooted in the Cal-Neva Lodge. And a lot of people haven't given the background about the lodge, and that's what we're going to do today. The Cal-Neva was originally built in 1926. It was designed as a destination for rest and relaxation, sort of a hot spot, a gambling spot, which was right on the line of California and Reno, Nevada. It was built by real estate magnate Robert Sherman. The lodge had a history prior to Sinatra's ownership, which made it shady way before Sinatra ever got involved. There was a Canadian military colonel named H.H. Betts who would end up disappearing from the lodge and would be found a year later 5 miles away in the woods, which would start what has always been claimed as a cursed property by anybody who's owned it. The second time the Cal-Neva would come up upon some shady type of shit is when the actress Clara Bow, who canceled 2 checks that were made out to the Cal-Neva Lodge, which is considered money owed for gambling. Bow, who was a degenerate gambler through and through, thought she could scheme her way out of owing money to this casino by basically canceling 2 checks totaling $13,000, which in those days was about $191,000, claiming that the casino chips that she used were only worth 50 cents versus actually being $100 chip per chip. In 1935, a group of investors would purchase the Cal-Neva, and they would bring in William Remmer to run the joint, acting as the pit boss and the president of the casino. That same year, Judy Garland, who was 13 years old, would perform at the lodge, and she would be paid $25,000, which was an incredible amount of money in those days. Then in 1937, there was a suspicious fire, and the original building of the Cal-Neva would burn to the ground, which caused over $200,000 in damage. They would rebuild, spending $500,000 utilizing 500 workers to work around the clock, and they were able to rebuild the property within a month. Also during that time, gambling would officially be legalized, making it truly one of the first legitimate casinos in Nevada. The lodge would end up getting sold at around the end of the Second World War for about $700,000 to Sanford Agler and his associates. Then in 1955, ownership would transfer again to Vert Grovar for about $1 million. It was also around this time that the Kennedy family had begun to frequent the lodge. Kennedy basically went there to utilize the lodge and the underground tunnels, which were actually built in bootlegging days for Prohibition days, and he would use the property to basically bang whoever he wanted. Hollywood starlets, prostitutes, etc. In 1951, on the advice of John F. Kennedy and others, Frank Sinatra would go out to visit the lodge. It was also at this time the press started picking up that Sinatra was hanging out there, and because he was a star, you know how that kind of goes. And at the same time, the first weekend that he visits in 51, he was going through a tumultuous time, obviously, with Ava Gardner at the time. They were having problems, and it was during this visit that Sinatra attempted to kill himself over being jilted by Ava Gardner, taking an incredible amount of sleeping pills. Security on the property had tipped off the press, and they ran with it, and it got into the news, which created a little bit of problem. Then in 1960, Sinatra ends up buying the Cal-Neva through his company Park Lake Enterprises on advice from Skinny D'Amato, who was largely responsible for Sinatra's start in the early days. Skinny D'Amato was a racketeer, and he owned the 500 Club in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Sinatra, initially would split the ownership in the following way. Skinny D'Amato, 13%. Hank Santacola, 13%. Sinatra would own 25%. Dean Martin would own 13%. Sam Giancana, 25%. And then there were a couple of others, like the Fischetti brothers and Jilly Rizzo, who would take a percentage as well. By 1962, Sinatra would begin to own more of a percentage of the lodge, owning more than 50% by that time, and then he would give Hank Santacola 33% and Sanford Waterman another controlling interest in the rest of that percentage. But it's always been said that Giancana, Dean Martin, Skinny D'Amato were still taking kickbacks from the proceeds. Sinatra had kept the property open, usually during the summer months. But then in 1962, they were making a lot of money, so they decided to open up for year-round business. Sinatra would build onto the property, adding a celebrity room, a theater, helicopter pads. It would revamp the pre-existing Prohibition tunnels that were underneath the grounds, which would basically allow mobsters to come in and out of the property without being seen by the press or other people. The problem with the Cal-Neva is that when Sinatra closed on the deal originally, Joe Kennedy was on the property, and he was being surveilled by the FBI at the time. The FBI was convinced and very concerned that Sinatra was using mob contacts to set up meetings between the Kennedys and the Mafia. The FBI also thought that Joe Kennedy had used mob contacts to help Sinatra acquire the lodge for a much cheaper deal than originally the asking price was for. The other concern the FBI had was that there was a direct link between the expansion funds and the Teamsters. There was evidence, and a lot of it, to suggest that Jimmy Hoffa personally gave Frank Sinatra all of the money out of the Teamsters pension fund to make the renovations and expansions to the property. So right away now we're seeing Sinatra, if we believe the government's assertion, was in bed with Jimmy Hoffa, and that ultimately would have come through Sam Giancana. Bobby Kennedy at the time was consistently worried about his brother's visibility. He was worried that the FBI would start to see things and find out things that could cripple him, at least politically. It was well known that John F. Kennedy was having affairs, and he goes to Frank Sinatra with these concerns. And he basically just explains to Frank is like, look, Jack cannot be seen with this one. He can't be seen with that one. We've got to do something. John F. Kennedy was banging Marilyn Monroe. And the press had started reporting questions as to what the relationship was between Marilyn Monroe and Kennedy, and they desperately wanted that to be shut down, and they didn't want Marilyn Monroe coming on the property when Kennedy was there. So what Sinatra does is he basically tells Bobby Kennedy that look, Marilyn can be here when John is here, but here's the thing. She's only allowed to use the tunnels, and she's not allowed to walk openly around the property. In fact, it's been alleged that the weekend prior to her death, Sinatra had her at the Cal-Neva Lodge, and there have been pictures that prove that she was there. And allegedly, what was going on was Monroe was allowed to come out there, Bobby Kennedy was there, and Sam Giancana was there. And basically, it was designed to sort of tell her to shut her fucking mouth and move on with her life. And one of the problems was Monroe was refusing to leave John F. Kennedy. She wanted Kennedy to leave his wife. He wasn't willing to do that. And then her threat was basically that if they did not, if Kennedy didn't leave his wife, she would go public and she would talk about the mafia, Sinatra, and everybody, and it was a real problem. And so the only person that weekend that was allowed to visit with Marilyn Monroe would have been Bobby Kennedy, Sam Giancana, and Peter Lawford, who was there. Monroe's husband at the time, Joe DiMaggio, had heard there were issues going on with Monroe, and he tried to get on the property of the Cal-Neva to pretty much get her out of there because he knew she was in trouble. And he was basically told if he didn't get off the property, he would be killed. That's just the way it went. That weekend, after being threatened by Giancana, she attempted to kill herself and was rushed to the hospital and had her stomach pumped. It would end up saving her life, but not for long. Some have even suspected and alleged that Giancana actually attempted to kill her that weekend and that she didn't die, and everybody got so paranoid that they hoped she learned her fucking lesson. Some people have even gone on to make the accusation that Monroe didn't even die in L.A., that she died out at the Cal-Neva, and they just covered it up. I don't know what the truth is to that. We'll probably talk about that for the rest of time. So the same year that this is all going on, the feds begin to look into the lodge's prostitution ring. Sinatra had loads of prostitutes on the property. Allegedly, as you entered the lodge, in the lobby, there were hookers everywhere. You hit a button and there you go, have at it. The other issue was that Sam Giancana had been blacklisted by the feds to go inside any casino in Nevada. He wasn't allowed to do it, but Sinatra refused to make him leave and pretty much allowed him to continue to do what he wanted to visit the property. That move in and of itself really pissed off Hank Santacola, who was a lifelong friend of Sinatra, and Santacola did not want to be investigated, didn't want anything to do with this shit, so what he tried to do is he tries to sell his shares to Sammy Davis Jr. and to Sinatra. Sinatra refused to budge and pretty much told Santacola, look, Giancana comes here because he's banging this one, he's banging that one, it's leisure time, there's nothing going on. And that wasn't good enough for Santacola, and Santacola literally never spoke to Sinatra ever again after that. The friendship was over. Not long after that, there was a reporter that somehow got on the grounds of the Cal-Neva and was able to get a photo of Sam Giancana, and he ended up turning that photo over to the Gaming Commission. The Gaming Commission then suspended Sinatra's gambling license because to them that was conflict of interest. Then the press would pick up on that story, making the situation pretty much unbearable and impossible for Sinatra, and Sinatra wanted out immediately. He said, fuck this shit, and what he ends up doing is he ends up leasing the property to Jack Warner, who owned Warner Brothers. Then the property was absorbed into Reprise Records, which Sinatra would own a huge share of, and would all absolutely piss off Sam Giancana. 4 years later, Sinatra would try to sell the lodge to Howard Hughes as a part of a renewal contract at the Sands Hotel and Casino. And Howard Hughes and Frank Sinatra just did not like one another. He sort of treated Frank Sinatra like shit, which led to Sinatra telling Howard Hughes to go fuck himself. He refused to sign at the Sands Casino, which meant that Dean Martin wouldn't do it, Liberace wouldn't do it, Sammy Davis Jr. wouldn't do it, Eartha Kitt wouldn't do it. And so basically artists began to blacklist the Sands, and they would move over to Caesar's Palace. And as part of the Caesar's Palace deal, they had to purchase the lodge for $2 million. And Sinatra also asked for a favor. The favor was that he wanted Howard Hughes killed, which the mob wasn't going to get involved in. And so also because of what ended up happening as far as the Cal-Neva is it really pissed off Sam Giancana. Not only did Sam Giancana lose somewhere he could kind of lay low, he lost access to the Kennedys, and just bad stuff continued to happen. And he felt that Sinatra was soft and that he bowed to the pressure of the Kennedys, he bowed to the pressure of the feds, and it really ended whatever relationship that Frank Sinatra had with Sam Giancana. And it also didn't help that Sinatra, once his gaming license was suspended, went absolutely fucking nuts in court, called them cocksuckers, rats, just an expletive filled rant. Doing that led the Nevada Gaming Commission to keep him away from having a gaming license until 1981, which we know that the Gaming Commission would go after Sinatra once again. And then the lodge would actually transfer a half a dozen times more. And it wasn't until recently that Larry Ellison bought the property and begun building again. So the Cal-Neva is going to open again. But the reason why the Cal-Neva is historically one of the more interesting places is because that's where Sinatra would meet Joe Kennedy. That is where Sinatra would have meetings with the Kennedys as far as where they were going to go. And a lot has been made out of Sinatra and the Kennedys. And it's worth noting that after Bobby Kennedy turned on Frank Sinatra, he never voted Democrat again. He was a lifelong Republican after the fact. The Kennedys baited Sinatra. They used him to get what they wanted. And Sinatra went to his people and got it done. And the problem, I think, was Sinatra always wanted to be a gangster. I think he had visions of himself being a mobster. He was friends with a lot of people. But I think what aggravated the mob, at least Giancana's point of view, was that, you know, here you are. You got work when nobody would hire you because of us. We did all of these things for you. And now Bobby Kennedy has done what he did. This is your fault. They were looking for somebody to blame. They were looking for a fucking scapegoat, and Giancana blamed Sinatra. In fact, on multiple times, Giancana had asked for the head of Sinatra on a plate. He wanted to kill him and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. A part of the problem was they didn't like the fact that Sammy Davis Jr. was married to my Brit, who was white. They didn't like that either. So that should tell you more about the times than anything. But Sinatra, listen, he used the mob to his advantage plenty of times. There have been rumors that he had a columnist killed, or I think it was not a columnist, some sort of sheriff's deputy out in Vegas killed. I don't know. There's lots of rumors about that. But the Cal-Neva was a place where the Hollywood elite could come. They could gamble. They could feel free. They could indulge themselves in any appetite that they had. And Sinatra and them would also use blackmail against certain celebrities like Errol Flynn, who was kind of into guys and stuff like that, just as a way to manipulate who they were. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, in my opinion, I really don't think that Sam Giancana can blame Sinatra for what the Kennedys did. Giancana got himself in trouble. You know, the tunnels were there for a reason. Stay out of the limelight. Stay out of the view of the guests and stuff like that. And Giancana didn't. And I think Giancana expected Sinatra to stick by his side regardless. But Sinatra got scared. I think once the feds really started looking hard, Sinatra says, fuck this, I want out. And I think that Giancana looked at that as sort of a soft move, a weak move by Sinatra. And ultimately, you know, it was Kennedy's playground for whores, booze, drugs, and whatever else they was doing. Sinatra supplied that for him. And I think that nobody took it more personally than Sinatra when John F. Kennedy turned on everybody. It's been long rumored that when Sinatra heard that Kennedy was killed, he was on a movie set and they shut the set down for the day. And allegedly, Sinatra's whole perspective on it was, fuck him, he got what he deserved. He was upset about it, but he's like, fuck him, he got what he deserved. He got in the way, he didn't listen. And I think nobody of that group took it more personally than sort of Peter Lawford. There's been a long time rumors that Peter Lawford was the cleanup guy for Marilyn Monroe. I personally don't believe that she was killed at the Cal-Neva Lodge. I think she was killed in her own home because if you look at the White House transcripts and anytime a president goes anywhere, it's marked down. And Bobby Kennedy was pretty much at her house a few hours before she died. And there's a lot of people that said that was the thing that led Peter Lawford to becoming a huge fucking drunk, is that he couldn't take what he knew, and that he was never the same after that. You can argue the justification if they killed her, gave her a hot dose, or whatever the case may be, but the Kennedys were trying to put a stop to what she knew. And the funny thing about it is Bobby Kennedy wanted to control Jack's political career, and Bobby Kennedy was banging the same broads that his brother was, so he was no better in that department. And it always vexes me to some extent how anybody, they always talk about the Kennedys like he was the greatest president that ever lived, yet Bill Clinton got a fucking blowjob. You people wanted him out of the fucking office. And I'm not getting political. I'm just making a point. Bill Clinton gets a blowjob, lies about it. You throw him out of office. You fucking get him out. And then you got Kennedy who was fucking everything that walked, and you had no problem with that. So there's a very big disconnect between what one president can do and what the other can't do. And I think that history will always look back. Listen, without Sinatra and Giancana, Kennedy doesn't get elected. No way that happens. It was not a landslide by any stretch of the imagination. So at the end of the day, that the Cal-Neva Lodge was an instrumental place because that's where they hammered out business. That's where they hammered out the mob's control over unions. That's where they handed out Teamsters money. So Sinatra was the bagman for the mob in a lot of different ways. So there you go. That's the history of the Cal-Neva Lodge. We are going to take a real quick break, and when we come back, we are going to get into Dino Bravo. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. Now, why are we talking about Dino Bravo? There's a couple of reasons. First of all, I probably should be clear. I'm not even really a wrestling fan. I think going back as a kid, I did watch it when I was a little boy. We're talking, 9, 10, 8, 9, 10, 11. I watched Mid-South, Mid-Atlantic, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, but I was never really a fan of WWE. I thought the product was a little different. But I haven't been a wrestling fan for fucking 2 decades or more now at this point. But the reason why I wanted to talk about it is because this obviously has to do with the mafia. And so, what many wrestling fans, while not wanting to categorize wrestling fans as dumb or slow, I just don't think that they really realize what happened to Adolfo Bresciano, who was Dino Bravo's real name. Wrestling writers like Dave Meltzer and Bill Apter, I don't think that they get how the mob operates, and I think that what you have a tendency of happening is wrestling writers tend to sensationalize marks. They sensationalize the story for the sake of wrestling marks. If you don't know what a mark is, you can look that up. And I think throughout the years, there's been a lot of miscommunication, specifically about this case. Now, there is a wrestling series that is filmed by Vice TV. And they're in their second season, and the show is called The Dark Side of the Ring. And apparently Dino Bravo is going to be one of the subjects on their show. And I was actually listening to Jim Cornette talk on his podcast, the Drive-Thru with Jim Cornette. Just type in Jim Cornette if you don't know who he is on YouTube, and you can listen to his stuff. He's a former wrestling manager. He's been in the business 30 plus years. He's a very famous guy. But Jim Cornette had done an interview with 2 of the producers or directors of this particular show, and they pretty much let it out that they could not attain any information about what happened in the case of Dino Bravo, that the police really weren't talking to them, and that they were basically going to tell the story from other professional wrestlers' point of view. And the problem with that is it's rumor and it's gossip, and I think... when I started hearing that they were going to do this, I figured, they're going to do this show, and it's likely going to be all about wrestling, and they're not going to be able to really focus on the mafia. And this is what this murder is about. This isn't about anything other than it's a mob hit. They admitted on the interview to Jim Cornette that the provincial police really pretty much refused to discuss the matter because the murder is still an open case. Dark Side of the Ring, in case you don't know, discusses the dark side of professional wrestling, and it's a monster hit for Vice. It's probably their biggest hit ever. The problem with the Dino Bravo case is that they're relying on guys who have third, fourth, and fifth party stories, which deal with rumors, which are going to probably more likely hinge on the wrestling side of things than the actual truth to what happened. Not that they're lying. by any stretch of the imagination. That's not the case at all. I just don't think that they have the right information or the sources, but I do. And before we jump into what exactly went down on March 10th of 1993, we need to do a little bit of background. Most wrestlers prior, to the last 10 years or so, didn't have long-term contracts. The idea of signing a 5-year deal just really was not something that Vince McMahon ever did. Most of these guys were at a year at a time, but now it's sort of contractually like sports. Okay, we'll sign you for a 3-year deal for X, Y, and Z. So when we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s, Dino Bravo and guys like that didn't have long-term contracts. They also did not have the luxury of being compensated for flying. Everywhere they went was driving from A to B, territory to territory. And that's just the way that they did things back then. So like I said, they had year-to-year contracts, and most of the money that they made, they would only make by putting asses in the seats. You didn't get a fucking dime from being a pro wrestler unless you put people in the seats. The idea of merchandise in those days really wasn't a thing. And so the way that today's professional wrestling is run is completely different from the way that it used to be. And I think a lot of today's wrestlers don't understand that. And I think that that's something that Jimmy Cornette would agree with. And listen, it wasn't an age where everybody in wrestling made money hand over fist like they do today. That's just simply not the case. Guys had to, like I said, put asses in the seats, and 364 days a year, they're going all over the place. And guys can have it put in their contract today that, travel expenses get paid, hotels get paid. So the days of 6 guys going in a town from territory to territory are fucking over. And many of those guys that we're talking about were gouged financially. They barely made ends meet. I mean, there isn't a fucking retirement plan for wrestling. Let's just be honest with you. And a lot of that's because Vince McMahon will not let wrestlers unionize. That's just the reality of it. Now, whether many wrestlers are wasting their money on drugs, women, booze, that's something entirely different. But most of the wrestlers from the old days are bankrupt. They don't have fucking 2 dimes to rub together. And all of that is important because Dino Bravo, whose real name was Adolfo Bresciano, was not a wealthy guy. Wrestlers were always looking for extra income, which is why many wrestlers like Ricky Morton, he's 60 years old, he's still throwing his man tits around the ring. He's still on the independents trying to make money because he has no other alternative. Ricky Morton can love the sport, but financially he has no other choice but to do this. There isn't a wrestling 401k, there's not a retirement plan, there's nothing for them. So Bravo, historically, never really got over on fans. He was big in Montreal, which is where he was from, but in the United States, not so much. And he never just got to the level where financially he was secure. And likely, this is the reason why he begins to look towards organized crime. And who we're going to talk about is the Cotroni crime family. At this time in Montreal, you had 2 major forces. You had the Cotroni crime family and the Rizzuto crime family. Bravo was related to the Cotroni crime family, having direct relation to Vic Cotroni, as Vic was his uncle, but it was by marriage, not by blood. It was by marriage. So at the time, Montreal's main sources of illegitimate income at that time was obviously 2 things: narcotics and cigarette smuggling. And the mob had pretty much at that point in Canada cut up the turf for narcotics. The Bonanos were handed Montreal. Joe Bonanno would send Carmine Galante to oversee that operation. Galante, in turn, brought in the Cotronis and the Rizzutos. A war would erupt between the Cotronis and the Rizzutos, but that's going back to the 50s and 60s, and I really don't want to venture back there. But needless to say, at least you have some sort of bearing on what was going on in the history of it. So Dino Bravo pretty much walks away from wrestling, and he doesn't have a lot of money. And through Vic Cotroni, he was able to get inroads into the mob. Now, while Bravo was never a made guy, and he was a low-level associate, he had the contacts in the United States which would enable him to import and or boost cigarettes. That's likely the only reason, other than his relation to Cotroni, that allowed him to even get on the fringe of that. Bravo would begin to smuggle cigarettes into Canada, and we aren't talking a couple hundred boxes here. We're talking thousands and thousands. And he dove pretty much headfirst into the deep end. And it didn't take long for other criminal groups like the Lupinos, the Sacra Corona, Andrangheta, and the Rizzutos to kind of start to see what was going on. The one rule was that Bravo was supposed to stay away from Indian reservations. That turf was not his, and he was to stay away. Those territories were often chopped up within other groups, and the Indian reservation was a spot where he can load a truck at a time, collect his money, and go. It was a middle ground. It was the black market center for smuggled cigarettes, and it still is. Bravo was warned repeatedly not to encroach in those areas, but he does it anyway, and that's his first mistake. So while he's continuing to bring in cigarettes in massive amounts, he begins to see that moving narcotics is probably more profitable and probably a little bit less of a hassle. The problem with that is that the routes of narcotics had been established in the days of Lucky Luciano, and we've talked about that on this show. Carmine Galante had also established new routes using the Sicilians in Italy, and the system worked, and everybody was making money, and what they did not need was a fucking interloper getting involved in the fray, and that's pretty much what Dino Bravo goes and does. He was warned not to interfere in narcotics, and he wouldn't listen. That's mistake number 2. And it also wasn't going to help that Vic Cotroni would end up dying, and his brother Frank ends up taking over control in 1984. There have been widely reported rumors that Dino Bravo made a deal with the cocaine dealers. The deal allegedly was that he would trade coke for cigarettes. Now, none of that is true. Bravo on his own was bringing in drugs and moving them. What compounded Bravo's problems was that the money wasn't adding up. Bravo could lift he could lift a truck, but apparently he couldn't add. He was a very strong guy, physically. Bravo was supposed to kick up money to the chain of command, close to like 20%, and that Bravo saw that as unfair. He thought 20% was robbery. He didn't like it. He was losing money, which is exactly why he gets involved in narcotics to begin with. And then he would just not kick up anything. His philosophy was that if he kicks up a percentage, then they're going to know he's moving narcotics. And if they find out he's moving narcotics, he's going to be killed. And ultimately, that's what's going to lead him down a path of no return. So the money begins to pour in, and many question how much he was making versus how much he was actually kind of kicking up, because he could overflow it with the tobacco and stuff like that. Now, Frank Cotroni immediately knew something was up. He knew that, look, a lot of these guys lied about how much money they were making. This was different because the sheer volume of cigarettes Bravo was moving did not add up to the amount of money he was kicking in. They thought that Dino Bravo was skimming, and they would essentially be right. Then the warehouse gets raided. Bravo was storing smuggled cigarettes in a warehouse in Montreal, and he had partnered up with somebody who was distributing narcotics, and a huge shipment was left, and his partner didn't pick it up in time. The warehouse gets raided as his partner arrives, and it causes a huge issue for both men. Bravo complained that his partner waited too long to get the shit out of there, and it was his fault. The partner blamed him for dropping a dime and ratting him out, which, in this case, it just really came down to a logistical nightmare. And so the issue gets taken to Frank Cotroni, who suspected that Bravo was skimming and up to some things that he shouldn't have been. The raid on the warehouse was big news, and it was a big problem. And he heard the rumors that Dino Bravo was moving drugs. He heard Bravo was encroaching on the Indian reservations. There were complaints from other guys, and he heard once again that the warehouse had been raided. So that in and of itself was allegedly enough for Cotroni to sentence Dino Bravo to death. On March 10th of 1993, he's sitting in his mansion in Laval while watching the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he gets shot from behind 10 fucking times. Bravo, by all accounts, knew he had problems, but from what people who knew what the deal was back then told me verbatim, that he thought he had protection from Cotroni, and whatever disagreement there was, he made them some good money, and he thought that money would buy him insulation and forgiveness, and he was fucking dead wrong. Now, many have speculated over the years who actually did this. Ultimately, the order would have come from Cotroni. No other way around it. Bravo was running a pretty big racket for him. Money was everything, and while everyone is replaceable, I think Cotroni might have looked past it. But once they found out he was violating the rules, he was skimming, he was stealing from them, then it became a disrespect issue. And I don't think they're ever going to solve that murder. But taking in everything that's been said over the years, with people I know who would definitely know more information about that situation than I ever could, have told me the same thing. You bite the hand that feeds you, and you're going to get killed without hesitation. And in this case, that is exactly what happened to Dino Bravo. And that's something that I do not think that the Dark Side of the Ring is going to cover. I would venture a guess that they're probably going to talk to Rick Martel, a former wrestler, who's going to say he was involved in cigarettes and narcotics and stuff like that. But if I can come upon this information, I don't understand how the RCMP doesn't have it. I think they do. I just think the problem is you can know all the reasons from A to Z, but if you can't point a shooter out, you can't convict a shooter, and the people that were responsible for ordering it are dead, then it's a dead case. You got nothing. And I think that's more of an example of the way Canada operates. And Dino Bravo got a little bit too brazen, a little bit too ballsy. He thought he could get away with some shit, and he didn't, because the people that he had, tried to mitigate, or people he tried to piss, or people he did piss off, were a lot more powerful than he ever could have been. And so the reason why I wanted to cover this is because I don't think anybody's ever really talked about just the cold hard facts about what fucking happened to the guy. That's what happened to him. He got greedy, and he paid for it with his life. I don't think there's any secret. The fact that he was a professional wrestler should be a side note to all of that. But like I said, I don't think the Dark Side of the Ring is going to cover it the way it probably should be covered. And so that's just Dino Bravo and what happened to him. Now, all that being said, we are going to get out of here for today. Stay safe with this coronavirus. The shit's still killing people. I wanted to thank everybody for listening in. I wanted to thank everybody who continues to donate to the channel. It means everything, and it enables us to do a couple of different things. We are going to be getting a shipment in, well, not a shipment, but a whole new system for how we do this. We're going to have a live call feature, and what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to do at least one show with live call-ins before we move to a pay site. I don't know when we're going to move to a pay site, and I say that to you is because with this coronavirus right now, it's just not the appropriate thing to do. And so we're just going to keep relying on the small donations that we do get, and everybody that does donate, we appreciate that. So, all that being said, stay the fuck out of trouble. Like I told you last week, don't rob a bread truck. Hit a fucking sneaker fucking truck and a fucking electronics truck. You do that, you can make some money. All right, that's enough criminality for today, you filthy animals. We'll see everybody next week on Mob Talk Radio.